Traveling beyond the galactic rim is not a matter of distance or navigation, because over the decades, every single attempt to cross the turbulence ended in disappearance. Every ship, every crew member, every piece of equipment vanished without a trace. When the first confirmed contact from outside the galaxy finally happened, it revealed exactly why. The beings that arrived brought biology, technology, and strategies completely different from anything in galactic civilizations. What followed showed the true scale of the threat: planetary warfare, decades of population manipulation, and methods of destruction that bypassed every normal defense. Both canon and legend sources reveal 5 key threats that make traveling outside the galaxy a confrontation with extinction. The barrier itself forms the first threat. Scientific evidence proves the galactic rim works as a physical barrier that no normal technology can overcome. In Legends continuity, specifically R.A. Salvatore's novel Vector Prime, scientists at the X-Gal Society set up monitoring stations to study the galactic rim. Their research revealed critical information about what exists beyond the edge of mapped space. The X-Gal 4 outpost on Belkadan focused specifically on Sector L30, which their calculations identified as the most likely breakthrough point for contact from outside the galaxy. According to the novel, the theory was straightforward. Turbulence existed beyond the small band of empty space surrounding the galaxy, possibly caused by crossing too near a tremendous gravity field. What made the barrier's nature clear was not survivors returning with warnings, but the fact that nothing ever returned. Several brave warriors and desperate outlaws entered the galactic rim turbulence over the last few decades, yet none were ever heard from again. The novel states this clearly: no distress signals were received, no emergency beacons activated, no debris fields were ever found. Before Yuuzhan Vong's arrival, no one had witnessed evidence of a breakthrough from outside the galaxy. Many scientists argued that such a breakthrough could not even be accomplished. The galactic rim worked as an absolute barrier through natural forces so powerful that normal technology could not overcome them. While scientists had theories about causes ranging from gravitational problems to hyperspace disruptions, the practical result was always the same. Then, something proved the scientists wrong. The outpost detected the breakthrough on their monitoring equipment. 3 enormous world ships, each 10 kilometers across, made entirely of living coral, pushed through the turbulence at Vector Prime, where countless explorers had vanished. The novel describes these vessels as massive living constructs powered by creatures called Dovan basils, organisms capable of locking onto specific gravity fields across millions of kilometers. Within days of detection, all 15 X-Gal 4 scientists were killed before transmitting a single warning. Yeoman Carr, a Yuuzhan Vong spy embedded in the outpost for years, released a biological weapon called a molecular plague. Within hours, the weapon transformed Belkadan's atmosphere into toxic yellow-green clouds. Meanwhile, the freighter was sabotaged beyond repair. Communications were severed before any distress signal could be sent. One scientist, Jerem Kadmir, received what the Yuuzhan Vong considered an honorable death when Yeoman Carr broke his neck rather than letting him suffer through the plague. Beyond the immediate casualties, the planet itself began changing, its entire ecosystem systematically rewritten to support Yorick coral growth. This was humanity's first confirmed contact from outside the galaxy, resulting in total destruction. What crosses that barrier forms the second threat. Invasions from outside the galaxy bring threats that evolved in complete isolation from galactic civilization. The Yuuzhan Vong invasion proves the scale of this danger. The novel reveals extensive details about what crossed the void between galaxies, why their biology and culture represented something beyond any threat the galaxy had previously encountered. The Yuuzhan Vong came from a different galaxy entirely. Their homeworld, Yuuzhan Tar, was destroyed in religious warfare that tore their civilization apart. As a result, the survivors spent generations traveling through the darkness between galaxies in massive world ships, a journey lasting centuries through the void between galaxies. During this time, they had to survive with no sunlight, no planets, no resources except what they carried. To survive, their solution was to make everything alive. Every piece of their technology was biological rather than mechanical, grown and shaped for specific purposes rather than built from metal and circuits. Physically, Yobenkar's observations reveal they averaged a dozen centimeters taller than humans, quite a bit heavier, with significantly less body hair. But it was their culture that truly set them apart. They valued ritual scarring and body modification as marks of devotion, with intentional disfigurement indicating rank and spiritual progress. Yobenkar's features showed this devotion: an often broken nose, an extended tear to his lip, a split eyelid, all intentionally inflicted. These remarkable tattoos and intentional disfigurements served as markers of rank within the warrior caste, with nearly complete tattoo coverage indicating the highest positions. This cultural emphasis on biological modification extended to their technology, which showed sophistication that mechanical engineering could not match. For example, the Uglith masker showed this approach, embedding thousands of tiny tendrils in the wearer's pores to create a complete human disguise, though removal caused intense agony. Similarly, a Nullith attached to the face with pincers, while a central tendril snaked down the throat to provide oxygen. Amphistaffs worked as adaptive weapons, serpents that could harden to stone consistency or become flexible whips depending on need. Even their vessels reflected this philosophy. Coral skippers could refuel by eating rocks, while Von Dune crabshell armor was grown rather than forged. But the true strategic advantage came from a different creation. The Yammusk served as a telepathic war coordinator capable of breaking minds as easily as it coordinated armies. The novel, Vector Prime, describes this creature in extensive detail. It resembled their god of war, Unyamka the Slayer, with a gigantic brain-like bulk featuring a single huge eye, a puckered maw, many tentacles extending from that bulk. The Yammusk stationed at Helska 4 was so massive that its bulbous portion rested in deep water beneath the ice, while tentacles stretched 100 kilometers long throughout the underwater base. Beyond its physical presence, the War Coordinator's capabilities proved devastating to enemy forces. It could bring scattered units into tight focus, allowing coral skippers to fly in perfect unison, making them many times more efficient in combat. This common bond extended to all Yuuzhan Vong warriors, working as a telepathic network that coordinated entire armies across vast distances. Additionally, the Yammusk could produce offspring that were trained immediately through mental joining with the parent, allowing rapid expansion of their command structure. However, the creature's most dangerous capability operated on individual targets rather than fleets. Through direct telepathic contact, it could shave away sensibilities until prisoners were left broken, their minds snapped from waves of promised horrors. When Jedi Knight Miko Reglia was subjected to this treatment, he experienced telepathic despair so powerful that his training provided no defense. Those exposed found they could not close their eyes, forced instead to watch their impending consumption while thin tendrils pulled them toward the Yammusk's maw. When all these advantages came together in a coordinated invasion, the destruction was absolute. In Legends continuity, the new Essential Guide to Alien Species records that the Yuuzhan Vong War lasted 5 years and killed an estimated 365 trillion sentient beings. They destroyed entire planets using a tactic called Yogan's Core, perfected by a legendary general in the ancient Kremlivian War. The process requires dropping a powerful Dovin basal to the planet's surface. Once deployed, it focuses one beam on the planet's core, the other on the passing moon, creating an inevitable gravitational catastrophe. Cernpedal became one of the first demonstrations of this method's effectiveness. When a Dovin basal was deployed on the surface, it pulled the moon Dobido out of orbit, triggering catastrophic tidal forces and geological upheaval across the planet. As the moon descended toward inevitable collision, Republic forces mounted desperate evacuation efforts. Chewbacca remained on the surface, coordinating rescue operations when Dobido finally impacted, crushing him, making him one of the first major casualties of the war. The third threat operates through manipulation rather than force. The unknown regions harbor civilizations that plan destruction across decades-long timelines. The Grisks represent a coordinated threat potentially more dangerous than direct invasion. In canon continuity, specifically Timothy Zahn's Thrawn Ascendancy trilogy, it reveals extensive information about threats operating beyond the edge of map space. The Chiss Ascendancy faces these threats in a region they call the Chaos, an area where hyperspace navigation is so dangerous that they rely on force-sensitive children called Skywalkers to guide their ships. Throughout the trilogy, particularly in Lesser Evil, Zahn explains that Skywalkers navigate through third sight, a mysterious ability that allows Chiss children to perceive dangers in hyperspace and maneuver around them. Without Skywalkers, navigation through the chaos takes several times longer, requiring jump-by-jump calculations where a single mistake can send a ship flying off course. The novel describes specific systems like Rapak as surrounded by variable electromagnetic fluxes, littered with asteroids that limit hyperspace entry to only a handful of vectors. These natural barriers make most systems nearly impossible to reach without precise navigation coordinates. Protected by these natural barriers, the Grisks operate from hidden locations and conceal their true appearance completely behind veils and armor with self-destruct systems. No one has ever seen what they look like, and the Lesser Evil novel describes the results of this secrecy clearly. When Grisks are eliminated in combat, their bodies explode with enough force to cause collateral damage to anything nearby, including their own comrades. What remains gives no clues to their biology or origin. Though their appearance remains hidden, their power is impossible to ignore. A single Grisk warship called Fate Spinner, classified as a Shatter-class Warmaster, could destroy an entire battle fleet in 2 hours. This level of military superiority forces even powerful species to serve the Grisks rather than resist them. Throughout Lesser Evil, Grisk representatives deliver explicit threats about who lives or perishes at their pleasure. The second book in the trilogy, Greater Good, reveals how a single Grisk agent planned the near-total destruction of an entire civilization in just 6 months using only 50 infiltrators. This agent, known as Jixtus, wore full veils that concealed his identity completely, served as a coordinator of Grisk operations. Rather than deploying armies or fleets, he relied on precision manipulation. 50 infiltrators called Agbui spread throughout the target population, methodically identifying pressure points, exploiting cultural tensions. The results demonstrated the effectiveness of this approach. Within 6 months, civil war spread across the planet as gray-black clouds covered the atmosphere. City lights across the surface went dark. The engineered internal conflict caused the civilization to destroy itself. The Grisks have been planning Chiss destruction for at least 20 years, adapting their strategy as new generations of leaders emerged. In Greater Good, Jixtus acknowledges that 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, he would have said destruction of the Chiss Ascendancy would be straightforward. However, he adapted his strategy as a new generation of leaders emerged. The novel shows him specifically recognizing Thrawn, Bakif, Arlani, and different types of leaders who think and plan outside normal patterns. The trilogy's final volume, Lesser Evil, establishes the broader scope of Grisk's ambitions. Beyond the Chiss, other nations existed throughout the chaos, all designated for conquest. Once these fall, the main galaxy becomes the next target. The Grisks view lesser space as future territory, with the unknown regions serving merely as the opening phase of a much larger campaign. The Grisks represent strategic manipulation, but other unknown regions' threats employ more direct brutality. The Vagari, documented in the Unknown Regions sourcebook, developed warfare tactics that contradicted every principle of civilized conflict. These nomadic pirates systematically captured prisoners from conquered worlds, then chained them in transparent pods welded to the exterior hulls of their warships. As a result, living captives worked as defensive barriers, forcing their opponents into an impossible choice: either destroy the captives to stop the Vagari vessels or allow the raiders to operate without resistance. For years, this tactic terrorized entire sectors until the Chiss Ascendancy finally encountered a Vagari armada in battle. Commander Thrawn eliminated the fleet, yet survivors managed to flee deeper into unexplored space. According to the sourcebook, their ultimate fate remains unknown, which demonstrates a persistent pattern throughout the unknown regions. Defeated threats do not surrender or integrate into galactic society. Instead, they retreat into uncharted territory, potentially regrouping across decades or even centuries before emerging again with adapted tactics. What appears eliminated may simply be waiting beyond the current detection range. The fourth threat defies every biological framework. The unknown regions contains entities that exist beyond normal understanding of life. The Mingle represents the most documented example of what lurks beyond map space. In Legends continuity, the 2010 sourcebook, The Unknown Regions, documents extensive information about threats lurking in unexplored territory. The sourcebook describes Mingle as thick, gray ooze that smells of sweet rot. This substance covers the planet Mugfallow from pole to pole, forming a world ocean of living matter. Unlike static organisms, the entity shapeshifts constantly, creating pseudopods, fanged mouths, eyes on stalks, crawling worms, bat-like flyers as needed. Its origin remains unknown, though some theories suggest it may be from another dimension or another galaxy, tied to reports of shapeless beings from beyond known space. Mingle's age remains unknown, though some sources associate it with the Celestials era circa 30,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. If accurate, the hyperspace anomaly bisecting the galaxy may have separated the entity's influence from celestial projects during that era, suggesting it predates most galactic civilizations. While its origins remain disputed, its capabilities are extensively recorded. The infection demonstrates biological warfare refined over millennia. According to the sourcebook, Mingle erupts from concealed pools, spreading across its prey's faces before entering through mouths and nostrils. Once inside, the substance penetrates the cranium, consuming blood and muscle tissue to increase its own mass. Within 24 hours, the process is complete. What remains is a hollowed shell filled with the entity's material, with the original consciousness destroyed. However, the body continues working under Mingle's control. These animated hosts display vacant stares and jerky movements despite having no pulse or respiration. When they speak, their voices carry an unnatural buzzing quality with no emotional inflection. Within 7 days, visible decomposition begins as gray fluid seeps from every opening, while the body remains ambulatory. Alternative infection occurs through ingestion of even small amounts. Targets who swallow bean-sized portions experience the same internal consumption over several days, remaining fully conscious throughout the process as the entity systematically hollows them from within. What makes Mingle nearly impossible to eliminate is not its infection method, but its psychological strategy. According to the Unknown Regions sourcebook, Mingle employs documented psychological warfare techniques. Records show the entity repeatedly uses reanimated family members, particularly children, to emotionally manipulate survivors into compromising security systems or opening protective barriers. The planet Mugfallow serves as its central intelligence, now utterly lifeless except for fossilized tree trunks. A ring of derelict warships orbits the world, including rare Gree sail ships, Zim the Despot's treasure barge. Meanwhile, gray pools lurk in caverns and sewer systems across thousands of infected worlds, meaning the entity maintains a distributed presence throughout explored space. While immune to blasters and edged weapons, the substance can be eliminated through fire, acid, poison, or noxious chemicals applied in wide areas. However, destroying individual pools does not eliminate the central intelligence on Mugfallow. While Mingle represents biological conquest, another unknown region's threat weaponizes decay. The sorcerers of Rand exist in unique states of disassembly and decay, according to the sourcebook. Chronicler Suket documented encounters revealing their varied forms. Some lacked skin entirely, oozed fluids with each movement, while others existed as blackened skeletons somehow maintaining animation. Some appeared turned inside out with teeth protruding from raw tissue, though the most disturbing manifested as ribbons of flesh swirling through chambers. Their movement proves equally varied, with some hovering above the ground, others scuttling on multiple legs, still others flapping on wings while refusing to descend. Beyond their physical horror, their philosophy sets them apart from all known Force users. Rather than viewing the Force as energy created by life, they worship the dark as the ultimate end of all existence. In their belief system, destruction is inevitable, represents the only true power source. As a result, they reject both Jedi and Sith concepts as limited perspectives, claiming instead to commune with fundamental reality rather than an energy field generated by living things. To pursue this philosophy without interference, they maintain complete isolation. Their base of operations lies deep in the unknown regions within the Perrin Nebula, protected by 12 outpost worlds, accessible only with specific coordinates or Force user guidance. Their belief in inevitable destruction manifests through specific abilities. These powers manipulate decay and death in ways no other Force users have achieved. The fifth lurks even in familiar territory. Extreme dangers exist in relatively well-mapped regions of space, proving that cosmic hazards are not limited to invasion from outside the galaxy or unknown regions exploration. In canon continuity, specifically the 2018 novelization Solo: A Star Wars Story Expanded Edition by Mur Lafferty, the Kessel region demonstrates that naturally occurring hazards and space-dwelling predators can be as deadly as any alien invasion. The Acades Maelstrom near Kessel combines every imaginable spaceflight hazard into a single region. The novelization describes it as ionized gas and debris swirling around a massive gravity well, with temporal distortion making it impossible to plot a direct course through. According to the droid navigator L337, ships that enter the Maelstrom do not return. Inside exist carbon bergs the size of planets, colliding with each other within massive electrical storms that render standard sensors useless. The standard Kessel run requires over 20 parsecs to navigate around the Maelstrom, but Han Solo completed it in under 12 parsecs by cutting directly through. This achievement saved approximately 25 to 30 light-years of travel distance while requiring simultaneous navigation through temporal distortion, gravity anomalies, electrical storms, planet-sized obstacles, and complete sensor blackout. However, the Maelstrom contains more than environmental hazards. The Summa Verminoth encountered during Han's run proves that life can adapt to even the most extreme conditions. This creature measures equal to an Imperial Star Destroyer at approximately 1,600 meters long, floating dormant in electrical storms that would destroy normal ships. The novelization describes it covered in eyes across every surface, constantly watching for prey. Its tentacles naturally conduct high-voltage electrical currents, indicating evolutionary adaptation to an environment lethal to most carbon-based life. When potential prey enters its territory, the entire organism activates from dormancy. Its hunting strategy demonstrates sophisticated predatory behavior as tentacles spread wide to form cage-like structures, trapping ships while suckers and stingers prepare to breach hulls or consume vessels entirely. During the Kessel Run, the Summa Verminoth pursued the Millennium Falcon toward the Maw, a planet-sized gravity well that prevents escape once ships cross the event horizon. Gravitational effects cause temporal distortion, making the creature's death appear to occur in slow motion. Its tentacles stretched beyond structural limits, snapped as different portions were consumed by the gravity well at different rates. The creature's eyes bulged from internal pressure as tidal forces stretched its body in some directions while crushing it in others. Despite its size and strength, it was systematically pulled apart by gravitational forces that no biological organism can withstand. The sum of Verminoth's death demonstrates a critical principle. Even apex predators evolved for extreme environments cannot survive conditions beyond their biological limits. These 5 documented threats reveal why the galactic rim works as an absolute barrier, not because it actively defends, but because normal technology and strategic frameworks fail completely in conditions beyond familiar space. What successfully crosses evolves specifically to bypass every assumption galactic civilization makes about warfare, biology, diplomacy, and the Force itself. Geographic isolation, not superior capability, explains why the galaxy has survived contact with these threats. When that isolation breaks down, casualties are measured in trillions.
Geographic isolation kept the galaxy alive against the threats outside it. Sometimes isolation worked the other way, hiding a single person on a single planet for 2 decades. After Order 66, Yoda passed over hundreds of remote worlds and chose a swamp the Empire was never going to investigate. The reasons he chose Dagobah specifically have very little to do with the swamp.
The choice Yoda made after Order 66 was more calculated than most people realize. When the last Grand Master of the Jedi Order selected a planet for exile, he passed over hundreds of remote worlds to settle on Dagobah, a fog-choked swamp crawling with predators. Dozens of planets had no Imperial presence. Some offered actual shelter, clean water, and breathable air. However, Yoda chose the swamp, and the real question isn't why he hid, but why he chose to hide there. According to Canon sources, particularly the Clone Wars series, Yoda first visited Dagobah during the war, years before Order 66. He did not find the planet through charts or military reports, and instead, the spirit of Qui-Gon Jinn guided him there. Qui-Gon had learned to keep his mind alive after passing, and through his power, he could speak with the living under certain conditions. During an important time in the war, he reached out to Yoda with a mission that would change the course of the Grand Master's life. The instructions were strict and left no room for doubt. Yoda had to travel alone. He could not tell the Jedi Council where he was going, and he could not bring anyone with him or record his route. These rules seemed extreme, but Qui-Gon made it clear that the secrecy was necessary for everything that would follow. Yoda, the leader of the entire Jedi Order, obeyed without question. He left Coruscant without explanation. When he landed on Dagobah, he found a world that was nothing like what he expected. The planet was not calm, but instead filled with predators, poisonous plants, and ground soft enough to swallow a ship whole. Thick fog covered everything, and the air was heavy with moisture. Dangerous creatures lurked in every shadow, and survival required constant awareness. Yet, Qui-Gon's spirit called Dagobah pure. This description seemed to go against everything Yoda could see around him. The swamp was hostile in every way, and nothing about it suggested purity or peace. But Qui-Gon was not speaking about the surface conditions. He was speaking about the Force. The Force worked differently there. The living Force, which flows through all creatures, was very strong on Dagobah, and life grew everywhere, wild and aggressive. Every corner of the planet was filled with living things fighting to survive and grow. At the same time, the cosmic force, which connects all things across time and space, also gathered there with unusual strength. These two parts of the Force rarely came together with such strength in one place. Because of this, Dagobah was not peaceful, but flooded with energy. This created something no other planet could offer. The Force on Dagobah did not behave normally, and instead created a kind of noise, a constant, very strong signal that drowned out everything else. On most worlds, a trained Force user could sense individual beings, track movements, and detect emotions. On Dagobah, all of that became impossible because the background energy was simply too loud. For a Jedi trying to disappear, this noise was more useful than any fortress. The Jedi Council never learned about Dagobah. Yoda returned to Coruscant and went back to his duties without saying where he had been. No one questioned his absence, and no one pressed him for details. The war continued, the Senate grew more corrupt, and Palpatine's power grew with each passing month. Through all of it, Yoda kept the planet secret, telling no one what he had found or why it mattered. This choice proved important after Order 66. When the Republic fell and the Empire rose from its ashes, Yoda already knew exactly where to go. He did not need to search for a hiding place or scramble to find safety. He had one ready, a location prepared years in advance for exactly this moment. His return to Dagobah after the fall was simple. He just left, slipping away from the chaos without drawing attention. No pursuit followed, no Imperial forces tracked him, and no Inquisitors sensed his presence because the Force itself seemed to swallow him whole. Yoda vanished as completely as if he had never existed. Imperial scanners could detect life signs and energy signals across huge distances, making it nearly impossible for anyone to hide for long. But Dagobah created so much living and Force activity that sensors could not pick out individual readings. The data came back as a jumbled mess with no clear patterns, and any officer looking at a scan of Dagobah would see chaos and move on to the next target. As shown in The Empire Strikes Back, Luke Skywalker experienced this firsthand when he arrived years later. His X-Wing's instruments became unreliable on approach, giving readings that made no sense. Navigation failed and pointed him in the wrong direction. Targeting computers gave information that did not match what his eyes could see. Because of this, Luke crashed into the swamp since his technology simply could not handle what Dagobah was showing it. The planet broke his equipment before he even landed. The Emperor and Vader were among the most powerful Force users in history. They commanded fleets and armies of hunters dedicated to wiping out every trace of the old order. They found and ended Jedi on dozens of worlds, tracking them across the galaxy with patience and skill. However, they never found Yoda. Dagobah removed him from the awareness of everyone who might have looked for him. For 20 years, the greatest Jedi in history lived in a swamp, and his most powerful enemies never knew. The dark side played a key role in making this possible. Dagobah contains something that should have made it wrong for any Jedi, a cave filled with dark side energy. The cave existed long before Yoda arrived, and its origins remain unclear even now. What is clear is that it sent out darkness all the time, giving off a signal that any Force user could detect from far away. The dark side radiated from that cave like heat from a fire, impossible to miss for anyone with the ability to sense it. For most Jedi, this would be a reason to stay away. Dark side places drew Sith attention because they were useful for dark side training and practices. They could also change anyone who stayed too long, slowly pulling them toward dark influence and twisted thinking. A Jedi seeking safety would normally avoid such locations at all costs. Yoda made the opposite choice. He settled near the cave on purpose, building his small hut close enough that the cave's energy surrounded him at all times. Every day, he lived within reach of that darkness. This was not an accident or a matter of convenience, but a carefully made plan with a specific goal in mind. The Darkside Cave was not a danger to Yoda, but his main defense. According to various Star Wars sources about Imperial Inquisitors, these hunters tracked Jedi using the Force itself. They were trained to sense the light side and follow it to its source. When a Jedi acted with kindness or used their powers to help others, they created a ripple in the Force, and that ripple could be traced back to them like footprints in snow. Lightside energy left trails that skilled hunters could follow. The more a Jedi behaved like a Jedi, showing compassion, protecting the innocent, using their abilities for good, the easier they became to find. Many Jedi fell because they could not stop themselves from helping people, and each act of kindness gave the Inquisitors another clue. Dagobah's Darkside Cave solved this problem completely. Because of this, Yoda's energy, no matter how strong, vanished into the noise created by the cave. It was like trying to hear a whisper in the middle of a thunderstorm. The smaller sound simply could not be detected. The process worked like opposite electrical charges. Light and dark existed in tension, with each able to cancel out the other under the right conditions. Yoda placed himself at the exact spot where his light side signal and the cave's dark side output balanced out. The two energies met and canceled each other out, and where Yoda stood, the Force registered as neutral, neither light nor dark, just empty space. Yoda understood how the energies worked and used that knowledge to create his own disappearance. The Emperor knew about dark-side locations since he had visited many during his rise to power. He understood their value and their dangers. When Imperial forces scanned Dagobah and detected the cave's signal, they reached a simple conclusion. The planet was useless because no Jedi would choose to live near such darkness. The very thing that should have attracted attention became the reason no one investigated. That belief kept Yoda's enemies away for 2 decades. The plan worked exactly as Yoda intended. However, living near the Darkside Cave for 20 years came with a cost that could not be avoided. The cave did not just send out energy, but affected everyone within range. Visions came to those who lived nearby, often showing painful truths or possible futures. Emotional pressure built over time, pushing against the mind and testing strength. These effects touched anyone who stayed close to the cave, and Yoda was no exception. For the Empire, Dagobah remained a dead end throughout their reign. Scanners showed nothing useful. Force detection found only a cave, and no records suggested the planet mattered in any way. Officers who reviewed the data saw a worthless swamp world and moved their attention elsewhere. The protection worked exactly as planned, but the cave demanded something else from Yoda in return, something far more personal than simple exposure to dark side energy. Dagobah was not the place where Yoda waited in comfort, but a place of constant challenge, not with enemies, but with himself. The protection the planet offered came at a cost, and that cost was paid in suffering. According to the Clone Wars series, the cave showed Yoda Order 66 before it happened, clone troopers turning on their generals, the temple burning, his students falling across dozens of worlds. He returned to Coruscant knowing what was coming, yet he could not stop it. Yoda did not flee to Dagobah to escape something unexpected or to hide from a surprise attack. Instead, he retreated to a place that had already showed him his failure in clear detail. Every day on that planet reminded him that he had received warnings and still could not prevent what happened. The common view of Yoda's exile treats it as survival, a smart retreat to stay alive for future resistance. Yoda hid so well that Jedi would not be completely wiped out, and his survival preserved hope for the future. This explanation makes sense on the surface, but the cave's visions suggest something more personal was happening. Yoda accepted responsibility for what happened to the Jedi Order. The Grand Master, who had trained Jedi for centuries, watched his order fall because he could not act on the warnings he received. That weight settled on him and never lifted. Dagobah was not about hiding from the Empire, but about carrying that weight. Yoda could have chosen an easier world, but he picked a location that forced him to face his guilt every day. The cave did not show him temptation or promises of power. It showed him truths he did not want to see. The students he had failed to save, the warnings he had dismissed, the pride that had blinded the Jedi to the Sith among them. Most Jedi would have resisted, but Yoda survived by accepting what the cave showed him. Over 20 years, the weight of his failure changed from burden to foundation. He learned from it, drawing wisdom from the pain, and that understanding shaped how he would eventually train Luke Skywalker. Luke would come to Dagobah carrying his own doubts, his own weaknesses, and his own potential for failure. He needed a teacher who understood what it meant to fall short and keep going anyway. Yoda's exile gave him something no comfortable hiding place could have provided: the experience of being broken and rebuilt. The price of the shield was 20 years of facing his worst moments, and he paid it willingly. He returned to Dagobah knowing what waited for him and accepted the pain, because running to safety while pretending the failure never happened would have been its own kind of giving in. When Luke arrived years later, he faced the same cave. His experience would differ, but the test remained the same. The strongest protection Yoda had was not the Darkside Cave or the Force noise, but absence from records. Technology could be fooled, and the Force could be blocked, but the simplest protection simply does not exist in any database anyone could search. The planet had been erased long before Yoda needed it. According to the Clone Wars, Qui-Gon's instructions during Yoda's first visit required total secrecy. No one could know about Dagobah under any circumstances. The Jedi Council, despite leading the Order and having access to all its secrets, was never told about the planet or Yoda's visit there. This was not a mistake, but a choice made on purpose. This secrecy kept Dagobah outside official records entirely. The Jedi kept detailed files on nearly every system in the galaxy, built over thousands of years of exploration and study. Their archives were among the most complete in existence, containing information that even the Republic government did not have. Any planet in those archives could be accessed by the Empire after the Order fell. When Palpatine's forces took the Jedi Temple, they gained access to everything stored there. Records, maps, member files, and historical data all fell into Imperial hands. Any world the Jedi had visited or studied became known to the Empire. Dagobah avoided this fate because it was never recorded in the first place. The Council did not question its absence since they had no reason to look into a planet they had never heard of. No one can search for what they do not know exists. Even Obi-Wan Kenobi did not know where Yoda went. The two surviving Jedi Masters made a key decision after Order 66. They would separate and go to different parts of the galaxy. They would watch over the Skywalker twins, protecting them from a distance, and they would have no contact with each other until the time was right. This meant neither could give up the other's location, even under pressure. Harsh questioning, mind probes, or simple accidents could not reveal what was not known. Yoda knew Obi-Wan was on Tatooine watching over Luke, but Obi-Wan did not know Yoda was on Dagobah. The one-sided knowledge was on purpose, because if Obi-Wan was captured, he could not give away Yoda's hiding place, since he simply did not have that information. The shared silence protected both planets. Tatooine and Dagobah survived the entire Imperial era without discovery. Luke grew up on one, while Yoda waited on the other, and neither location was found because the needed information existed only in minds that were never captured. The Empire could not force secrets out of people who did not have those secrets. But they could not chase what did not exist in any system they could reach. Luke's journey to Dagobah in The Empire Strikes Back showed how complete the erasure was. He could not find the planet through normal methods because no navigation computer had its location, and no database listed it. Luke reached Dagobah only through Force guidance, a vision that showed him where to go. This was something the Empire could not copy or block because it did not depend on technology or records. The Force itself led Luke to his teacher, going around every system that might have tracked him. Even accidental discovery was stopped. Dagobah stayed hidden throughout the entire reign of the Empire, from the first days of Order 66 to the fall of the second Death Star. After the Empire fell, the secrecy continued. Luke kept Dagobah's location protected even when there was no longer direct danger. The planet where he trained, where Yoda passed, and where he faced his inner darkness, he did not share its location with the New Republic or anyone else. Dagobah existed only in bits and pieces and rumors, and those who knew where it was could be counted on one hand. The secret remained a secret even after the reason for keeping it had passed. The Jedi Order had fallen partly because it had become too organized. Its knowledge was recorded and stored in systems that could be captured. When the Empire took the Temple, it gained access to almost everything the Jedi had known. That information helped the Empire hunt down survivors for years. Dagobah stood for the opposite approach. It was knowledge that existed only in living memory and could not be taken because it was never written down. When everything fell, the escape route was ready because someone had planned ahead. But Dagobah had one more job to do. Dagobah did not accept visitors without testing them. The planet measured everyone's character through challenges that had nothing to do with fighting or power. Strength with a lightsaber meant nothing there. What mattered was something deeper. Yoda had been chosen for Dagobah, guided there by Qui-Gon's spirit, prepared through visions, and picked for a purpose that took decades to unfold. The planet accepted him because he was meant to be there. Luke Skywalker would not receive the same welcome. Instead, he would be tested. The test began before Luke even met his teacher. According to The Empire Strikes Back, when Luke crashed his X-Wing in the swamp and climbed out, he met what seemed to be a small, strange creature. This being appeared harmless, maybe even foolish, with odd speech patterns and strange behavior. It went through Luke's supplies without asking, made annoying comments, and generally acted like a pest. Dagobah tested Luke through failure. He failed Yoda's first test of patience, then failed to understand the cave's warning about his own darkness, and later failed to lift his X-Wing because his mind had already decided what was impossible. Eventually, visions of his friends in danger pulled him away because his training was complete, and he rushed off to face Vader, paying the price for that choice. Yet Dagobah's true test was never about any single failure. It was whether Luke would return after failing so completely, and he did. Humbled and aware of how much he still did not know, he came back to finish what he started. That willingness to face failure and keep going was what mattered most. On this final visit, Yoda completed his training and passed on, knowing the last Jedi had been trained. Those who passed its tests carried something forward, and those who failed were forgotten.
Dagobah worked because the galaxy had forgotten it existed. Tatooine was different. The galaxy knew Tatooine existed and chose to ignore it anyway. And what survived there was a people the rest of the galaxy preferred to call savages rather than ask what their history actually was.
The Tusken Raiders have been attacking settlements on Tatooine for generations since the first colonists arrived, yet no one understands why they fight. When Anakin Skywalker found his mother dying in a Tusken camp after being held captive for an entire month, he made the same mistake everyone makes. He assumed they harmed her because they are savages. However, the truth is far worse than simple savagery. What happened to Shmi was not random brutality, it was an instruction, and canon and legend sources reveal the system that made it necessary. The first dark truth. Pain is how Tuskens teach obedience and worth. In canon continuity, when Boba Fett undergoes combat training with a Tusken tribe in the Book of Boba Fett Season 1, Episode 2, The Tribes of Tatooine, the method is revealing. A Tusken warrior repeatedly knocks the Gaddafi stick from Fett's hands during practice sessions. The training is harsh and repetitive, with no theory taught, no progression from safe drills to full contact, and no verbal explanation of technique. Fett learns by experiencing pain and adjusting until he can disarm his opponents, not by understanding concepts or receiving instruction. This is not unique to outsiders learning Tusken ways. In fact, Luke Skywalker's encounter with Tusken Raiders in the 1997 film A New Hope follows the same pattern. A Tusken brings down his curved, double-pointed Gaddafi blade, knocking Luke unconscious. The weapon is described as the dreaded axe blade that has struck terror in the hearts of local settlers, with its curved double points designed to maximize both visible threat and physical damage. Beyond their own people, this teaching method extends to captives. When Tusken Raiders take Shmi Skywalker, they hold her for an entire month and subject her to daily hardship. In the Legends continuity, the Attack of the Clones novelization by R.A. Salvatore reveals that this was more than simple captivity, but the Tusken way of measuring their enemies. From the nods and the tone of their voices during her captivity, she realized that her resilience had impressed them. The month-long ordeal served as an evaluation, with her ability to endure determining her worth in their eyes. Even cultural education operates through the same system. According to another legend source, The Essential Guide to Alien Species, Tusken storytellers preserve tribal history through perfect memorization, with apprentices learning every tale of each lineage. However, if the apprentice makes a mistake, they are executed outright, because such an error is considered blasphemy. Once a storyteller gives an account for the first time, not one word is permitted to change from that time forward. The cultural knowledge that defines Tusken identity is taught through the threat of death, with perfection required or execution delivered. What becomes clear from combat training, weapon design, captivity, and cultural education is that in Tusken culture, pain is not a tool for achieving other goals, but the goal itself. This creates a teaching system where pain proves who has value. In canon continuity, when Cobb Vanth recounts his history with Tusken Raiders in The Mandalorian Season 2, Episode 1, The Marshal, he states they attacked his settlement less than a year ago and killed half a dozen people at the mining camp. His response was violent retaliation, in which he took down about twice as many Tuskens. Despite a 2-to-1 casualty ratio in the settlers' favor, the conflict continues. Neither side treats violence as a signal to stop or negotiate. Both sides treat violence as the only form of communication that matters. The fighting itself has become the relationship, rather than a breakdown of the relationship. The Tusken approach to teaching through force creates individuals who understand power only through physical proof. Warriors who have learned nothing but combat make effective raiders, but they require strict control systems to maintain tribal unity. However, this is where Tusken identity construction becomes critical. Creating warriors requires more than combat training. It requires removing any competing loyalty that might pull individuals away from the tribe. That removal starts with making sure no Tusken can be recognized as separate from any other. The second dark truth: masks and anonymity eliminate personal identity. Tusken identity is built through the erasure of individuality, and this begins with what they wear. During Boba Fett's initiation ceremony, the Tusken clothe him with Tusken robes, scarves, and bandages. Every initiate receives the same wrappings, the same masks, the same coverings, with no room for personal expression. The uniformity extends beyond simple tradition. In a legend source, Kenobi by John Jackson Miller establishes that seeing another's face was grounds for a duel to the death, with exceptions only for parents, spouses, and children under 16. A Tusken who looks upon another's face outside these permitted relationships must fight to the death. The erasure extends deeper than physical covering. No individual Tusken in any canon source is given a personal name. They are identified exclusively by role or age. The Chief, a young Tusken youth; an older Tusken, a Tusken sentry, the Tusken chieftain. Ben Kenobi lived on Tatooine for decades. He understands Tusken language, can recognize their tracks, and knows their territorial patterns. Yet, he still refers to them collectively as the Sand People, or Tusken Raiders, stating they speak in a coarse, barbaric language, but never mentioning individual names or identifiers beyond tribal affiliation. Either Tuskens do not use personal names at all, or they keep them completely internal to their culture, never revealing them even during extended contact with outsiders like Fett, who live among them. The linguistic standardization reinforces this uniformity. All Tusken communicate in the same Tusken language, with no regional variations noted. Din Djarin uses the same language and sign system with tribes across different regions of Tatooine, preventing the formation of distinct regional identities that might compete with tribal loyalty. Individual achievement is recorded only as tribal action, making personal accomplishment impossible outside collective identity. This becomes visible during the Krayt Dragon Hunt. Every action is attributed collectively. The Tuskens fire their ballistae. The Tuskens and settlers try to drag out the beast. No individual Tusken is distinguished by specific actions, with the collective performing, the collective receiving credit, and personal distinction remaining structurally impossible. The anonymity serves a function beyond simple collectivism. It prevents an individual's reputation from competing with tribal authority. The chief maintains authority through position, not achievement. Challengers cannot build reputations because reputation itself cannot exist, preventing individual power accumulation that might fracture tribal unity. This erasure of individual identity creates warriors who understand themselves only as extensions of the tribe. However, warriors require more than identity uniformity and combat training. They require spiritual justification for violence that transforms killing from sin into sacred duty. That justification comes from a religion built entirely around bloodshed. The third dark truth: Tusken spirituality depends on sacrifice and ongoing combat. Tusken religious practices integrate warfare directly into ceremonial life. When the Tusken chief gives Boba Fett a gecko for his vision quest, he explains that Fett must swallow the lizard, which will guide him from inside his head. The hallucinogenic experience is mandatory, with Fett experiencing visions of trees and oceans and creatures with red eyes, along with flashbacks to his escape from the Sarlacc that connect past trauma to present spiritual transformation. The vision quest is not abstract spiritual enlightenment, but has an immediate practical purpose, identifying the material for weapon creation. Fett returns with a branch to craft his Gadurfi stick. After completing the weapon, the tribe gathers as he parries with the other Tusken Raiders before a campfire, dancing around the flames in celebration of the newly created weapon. The spiritual journey's purpose was to produce a warrior through a revealing sequence. Trauma recall through forced hallucination, weapon creation, ceremonial combat, and religious dance. The spiritual transformation cannot occur without these combat elements, meaning a Tusken who experienced peaceful visions and returned empty-handed would fail initiation. Combat is not something that happens to Tuskens and requires religious explanation. Combat is what Tusken religion produces. Funeral rites follow the same pattern. After Pike Gunners kill a Bantha and several Tusken Raiders, the tribe holds a cremation that same night, with Fett himself carrying the remains of a young Tusken youth whose parents fling his remains over a fire. There is no mourning period, just death during the day and cremation that night, with the dead honored by burning them quickly and returning to the activities that caused their death. This rapid cycling through grief creates warriors who cannot afford emotional attachment. When loss is ritualized to occur within hours rather than processed over weeks, the emotional impact must be minimized, or accumulated grief would destroy the warriors psychologically. War cries operate on the same principle. During the Krayt Dragon Hunt, 3 Tuskens approach the cave and make war cries that awaken the dragon, serving both as a tactical positioning tool and a ceremonial announcement that transforms the hunt into a spiritual practice. The integration of combat into spiritual life means Tuskens cannot practice their religion without fighting. Initiation requires hallucinogenic visions leading to weapon creation. Funeral rites transition immediately back to warfare, and war cries that summon danger are ceremonial acts. A Tusken who refuses combat cannot complete initiation, honor the dead, or participate in sacred challenges, making peace equivalent to heresy. Warriors who have been trained through combat, stripped of individual identity, and religiously commanded to fight need a mechanism to absorb outsiders. A culture built on warfare must transform enemies into members or face extinction from constant losses. The solution is not to kill outsiders, but to remake them entirely. The fourth dark truth: outsiders are absorbed to grow tribal strength through forced cultural assimilation. Tusken assimilation is not limited to occasional captives. According to the legend source Kenobi, the Tusken Raiders often replenish their numbers by taking outsiders into their families, with one character noting that a human sister had joined their family years ago through this practice. The absorption of outsiders is created as standard recruitment rather than a rare occurrence, revealing a systematic approach to maintaining the tribal population through cultural assimilation. The completeness of this transformation is visible in Din Djarin. He speaks to Banthas in Tusken, communicates using their sign system, and negotiates complex agreements like the Krayt Dragon cooperation that requires understanding Tusken honor codes. His integration is so complete that he can represent Tusken interests to settlers and settler interests to Tuskens, functioning as a bridge between cultures while remaining loyal to Tusken values. After Boba Fett helps stop hover train attacks, the chief calls him a good guide, meaning someone who could lead effective raids and train warriors in new combat techniques. The approval comes from successfully adopting Tusken values, with outsiders measured by their contribution to tribal warfare capacity. The assimilation process is unidirectional. Tuskens do not adopt settler customs or technologies beyond what serves warfare. They adopt speeder bikes only after Fett trains them to use these vehicles for raiding. Outsiders become Tusken, or they remain enemies. This ability to transform outsiders into Tuskens strengthens the tribe. However, forcing enemies to become members does not explain why the fighting never stops. That requires understanding how Tusken justice operates. When one Tusken commits an act, every Tusken becomes responsible. The fifth dark truth: Tusken justice punishes groups, not individuals. Tuskens make no distinction between individual settlers. According to the Essential Guide to Alien Species, Sand People are inherently angered by the presence in their territories of off-world settlers, and will often attack moisture farmers and settlers without provocation, targeting them simply for belonging to the settler category. The Attack of the Clones Visual Dictionary notes that Sand People are reputed to slay anyone foolish enough to come near their sacred wells, killing anyone who approaches, regardless of their individual identity or intentions. A settler who just arrived on Tatooine faces the same treatment as one whose family has occupied Tusken territory for generations. The dark truth is not that Tuskens alone think this way, it's that settlers mirror the exact same logic. The Attack of the Clones Visual Dictionary characterizes all Tatooine's native Tusken Raiders as violent enemies of the moisture farmers, with no distinction made between tribes or individuals. Klieg Lars demonstrates this when describing the group that took Shmi, saying those Tusken walk like men, but they're vicious, mindless monsters. Both groups operate on identical collective threat frameworks where individual identity becomes irrelevant, and group membership determines guilt. This makes resolution structurally impossible because neither side can negotiate with individuals when individuals don't exist in their system of justice. However, collective guilt alone does not explain why territorial conflicts never end. That requires understanding how Tusken territorial claims operate. The sixth dark truth. Tusken culture relies on conflict to persist. Tusken territoriality operates without legal recognition, creating permanent conflict with anyone attempting to use Tatooine's desert regions. Moisture farmers establish farms without negotiating with Tusken tribes, and the Tusken respond with raids that enforce their claims through force rather than contracts. The hover train attacks demonstrate systematic escalation of this approach. The Pike Syndicate runs hover train routes across Tatooine's desert that cross territory Tuskens claim through traditional use. The Tuskens respond with systematic ambush, attacking frequently enough that the Pikes allocate gunners specifically to defend the trains and turn routine transport into armed convoy operations. Neither side recognizes the other's claim as legitimate, and the absence of legal frameworks means every territorial dispute becomes another fight. This creates perpetual low-intensity warfare that cannot be resolved through negotiation. When Obi-Wan rescues Luke, he mimics a krayt dragon call that scares off the Tusken attackers, who assume a krayt dragon is nearby and retreat immediately. However, the Tuskens return to the same territories afterward, with the threat creating only temporary displacement rather than permanent abandonment. Even overwhelming force produces tactical retreat, never strategic surrender. Territorial defense intensifies when resources are involved. As revealed in a legend source, The Secrets of Tatooine, Tusken tribes tightly guarded their secret desert oases, the main source of their food, defending them through force against any approach. The oases produce hubba gourds, difficult-to-digest fruit that Tuskens subsist on, with dietary dependence on a single resource at specific locations, creating structural incentive for territorial conflict. A tribe losing control of its oasis loses its food supply, making compromise impossible. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle where every element depends on the others. Environmental scarcity drives territorial conflict, which reinforces cultural emphasis on combat, which produces warriors trained from childhood to respond to challenges with force, which increases casualties, which requires rapid cremation and immediate return to fighting. The cycle cannot break because removing any single element would collapse the entire system. But the cycle requires one final element to sustain itself. Suffering cannot simply be endured, it must be transformed into sacred validation. The seventh dark truth. Atrocities become sacred validation through trauma ritualization. Tusken culture turns trauma into a social structure. Personal suffering reinforces their way of life rather than questioning it. This is most visible in their relationship with banthas. According to the legend source Star Wars Complete Encyclopedia, Tusken Raiders and their bantha mounts share an almost symbiotic relationship, meaning they are deeply connected like two species that cannot survive without each other. The relationship goes beyond practical use. Marriage ceremonies involve both Tusken partners and their banthas, creating a four-way bond. When a Tusken passes away, their bantha goes into a frenzy that usually kills the creature, and the bantha is turned loose in the desert rather than given to another Tusken. This wastes a valuable resource in a resource-scarce environment. The tribe sacrifices its survival capability to honor the bond. The inverse creates social death for the Tusken. The encyclopedia notes that a member who lost his bantha was considered incomplete and an outcast among his people, with no way to restore their status. The trauma becomes a permanent identity marker. The ritualization of suffering begins even earlier. The book notes that babies often perish because of the difficult desert life, and Sand People take great pride in knowing that only the strongest survive. Infant death, which most cultures grieve as a tragedy, becomes a source of pride in Tusken society. The loss of children is reframed from a devastating loss into proof of evolutionary strength. Personal suffering becomes rigid social classifications that pass trauma across generations. The environmental trauma follows the same ritualization. During sandstorm season, clans hold themselves up in the needles according to Secrets of Tatooine, and many gruesome legends surrounded Tusken Raiders during this period. The legends describe clans fighting over limited resources during sandstorms. Rather than teaching cooperation or planning, these stories teach that only the strong survive. As a result, the next generation repeats the same behavior. The coming-of-age rituals make this trauma conversion official. In Legends continuity, the source documents that Tuskens pursued rigorous rites of passage, such as hunting the deadly crate dragons to become adults. These are the same creatures whose calls cause Tuskens to retreat immediately, the same creatures that represent overwhelming power that Tuskens cannot safely handle. Yet, young Tuskens must face these predators as a rite of passage. The near-death experience is required for adult status. The terror of facing an enemy that can easily kill you becomes the necessary transformation into adult membership. The culture cannot produce adults without putting children in mortal danger. A Tusken who refuses the crate dragon hunt remains a child forever in social status, regardless of physical age. The fate of those who fail is even more revealing. If they do not return from their trial, no word is mentioned of them again. Those who do not survive during the crate dragon hunt are removed completely from tribal memory, treated as if they had never existed. The trauma of losing children to these deadly rituals is not processed through mourning, but through erasure, with failed youth disappearing from both conversation and collective history. However, the trauma system that creates fearless warriors also creates unexpected weaknesses. The ritualization of trauma creates not only cultural rigidity, but also physical vulnerability. The encyclopedia notes that the Sand People were easily intoxicated by simple sugar water, literally just water with sugar dissolved in it. This basic drink that most species consume without issue reveals how their isolation created exploitable weaknesses. The same system that makes them effective warriors makes them vulnerable to simple substances. The Tusken Raiders built a culture where every element reinforces the same goal, producing warriors who cannot imagine peace. The desert does not care about morality, it only cares about what survives. The Tuskens survived by making suffering into structure, by turning every trauma into another reason the system must continue. What began as a harsh adaptation became a systematic design. The design became culture. Now, centuries later, the system functions so completely that peace would threaten the species itself.
The Tuskens made suffering into the foundation of their culture. Han Solo had suffering done to him on a single afternoon by people who had a different use for what he could become. Nobody asked him, nobody told him. By the end of the day, he wasn't a person anymore. He was an object that could be carried, sold, and mounted on a wall. Nobody told Han Solo what was going to happen to him. There was no briefing, no consent, no preparation. One moment he was standing on a platform in a room full of steam and machinery, and the next, he was gone. Sealed inside a block of carbonite, his last expression locked in permanent agony on the surface. His body technically alive and completely unreachable. He would stay that way for a year. From his perspective, no time would pass at all. From everyone else's, the war would continue. His friends would risk their lives to find him, and his body would be bought, sold, transported across the galaxy, and mounted on a wall as a trophy, all while he was present for none of it. Carbonite freezing is usually treated as a plot device, the thing that happened to Han between films. It is often remembered as a temporary obstacle or a cliffhanger between two chapters of the story. But when you look more closely at how carbonite actually works across canon and legend sources, a much darker reality becomes clear. What happened to Han Solo was not simply a pause in the story, it was one of the cruelest fates in the Star Wars universe. Chapter 1: A machine not meant for humans. Before Han Solo, before Vader, before any of it, carbonite was a gas container. Tabana gas, mined from the atmosphere of gas giants like Bespin, had to be shipped across the galaxy in a stable form. Carbonite was the industrial solution. The carbon freezing chamber at Cloud City was built for that purpose. Heavy machinery, open pits of molten metal, crane systems, and steam. a factory floor with no consideration for what it might do to a living person. The infrastructure was never designed with a human being in mind. The technology to freeze living beings had been understood for decades before Vader arrived at Cloud City. Clone Wars-era military operatives had deliberately frozen themselves to bypass life-form detection systems. They understood the risks and had time to prepare. What Vader did to Han Solo was the same process, applied without warning and without any concern for whether his mind or body would survive it. Vader's purpose was not punishment, it was a test. He needed to know whether a human being could survive carbonite freezing before he used the process on Luke Skywalker. Han Solo was the trial run, not chosen for anything he had done, but chosen because he was available, and because his value to Jabba the Hutt meant there was incentive to keep him alive. His survival mattered to Vader only as a data point. Han Solo was not a prisoner being punished, he was an experiment. Chapter 2. Between Life and Death. There is something the Star Wars galaxy never fully answers, and never stops implying: whether a person inside carbonite is conscious at all. The film doesn't say, and neither do the technicians. The monitoring equipment confirms that Solo is alive, metabolic activity, preserved biological function, hibernation state, but no instrument shown can measure whether anything is happening behind his eyes. The question is deliberately left open. Sources that address it at all describe the technicians' discomfort with the ambiguity. Experienced workers who had run the process on cargo for years and found themselves trouble when the cargo had a face. What we know is what exits the block. When Leia thaws Solo in Jabba's palace, what emerges is a person who cannot stand, cannot see, does not know where he is, and cannot trust his own perception of time. His first words are panicked, his body requires support to stay upright, and his vision takes time to return. These are not rare complications, they are documented, expected outcomes. The galaxy knew carbonite caused this. They used it anyway. The design of Han Solo's frozen form made this visible to everyone. His face on the surface of the block carries an expression of pain, arms raised, mouth open, the face of a man in the worst moment of his life, captured and held indefinitely. Every person who walked into Jabba's throne room for the next year saw his suffering as a wall decoration. The horror is not knowing whether the person inside is aware, and the horror compounds because that question cannot be answered from the outside or communicated from within. Chapter 3. A Person for Sale. Between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, Han Solo's body changed hands at least 3 times. Boba Fett transported the block to Jabba's palace. That much is in the films. What happened in between is documented in the wider canon. Fett lost the block, Crimson Dawn intercepted it, and they put it up for public auction. An auction for a living person. The bidders, crime lords, imperial officers, underworld representatives each placed a monetary value on his frozen body. His utility as a political prop, a trophy, a debt, or a leverage point determined his price. Crimson Dawn framed the auction as a demonstration of power, using his frozen form as the medium of that message. His objectification was not a side effect, it was the point. When the block eventually reached Jabba's palace, it was mounted on the wall of his throne room, not stored, but displayed. His frozen expression of agony became decoration, a permanent fixture in a room where deals were made and people were threatened. He was present at every meeting and could not leave. The language around Solo throughout this period is revealing. Characters who handle the block refer to it as it, the block, the cargo. The grammar of personhood quietly disappears, less an act of deliberate cruelty than a reflection of what carbonite does to how a person is perceived. Once a body is sealed inside an object, it becomes difficult for those handling it to apply the social knowledge of personhood, even when they know someone is inside. Carbonite does not just immobilize a person, it converts them, turns a human being into an object that can be owned, sold, displayed, and disposed of. He became an it because the process made him one. Chapter 4. Removed from time. From Han Solo's perspective, The Empire Strikes Back ends and Return of the Jedi begins in the same instant. He does not experience the year between. He does not experience the battles the rebellion fought, the decisions his friends made without him, the way the war shifted and moved and continued without waiting. From inside the carbonite, there is no year. There is only the moment before and the moment after, with nothing in between. From everyone else's perspective, a year passed. Leia organized and executed a rescue mission across the galaxy. Luke continued his training and became someone different from the person Han remembered. The war moved forward. People made choices that changed everything, and Han was present for none of them. The people closest to him had to keep living without being able to grieve him, without being able to stop searching, suspended in their own way by his suspension. Carbonite does not pause time. It removes one person from it while the world continues at full speed. The frozen person is held still while everything else moves. This was not new, and it was not accidental. Carbonite had been used for human suspension since the Old Republic era, thousands of years before the original trilogy, and was still in use over a century after Return of the Jedi. The galaxy had millennia to develop something that didn't do this to a person. It chose not to, because the ability to remove someone from time entirely, to place them outside of events while events continued, was too useful to give up. Carbonite does not imprison someone in time, it removes them from it. The galaxy moves on. The person inside does not. Chapter 5. A Living Tomb. Death is an ending. It is final, permanent, and in its own way resolved. The people left behind can grieve. They can mourn, move forward, and eventually carry the memory of someone rather than the weight of their absence. Death has a shape. It can be understood. Carbonite is not that. A person in carbonite is alive, biologically, technically, measurably alive. Their heart does not stop. Their metabolism does not cease. They are preserved in a state of biological suspension that can last for thousands of years. They are not dead, but they are not living either. They occupy a space between the two that has no language for it, no ritual for it, no way for the people outside to process it. They are also an object, not in metaphor, literally. They have been converted into a block of material that can be handled, transported, auctioned, mounted, and stored. The social grammar of personhood does not apply to them. Their face is on the outside. Their self is not. They are outside of time. The world continues without them. Battles are fought, people change, years accumulate, and when the block is finally opened, the person inside steps out into a present that has moved on without them, into a body that doesn't work, into blindness, into disorientation, into the knowledge that they were present for all of it as an object and absent from all of it as a person. And through all of it, they may be aware, unconfirmed, undisproven, simply unknown. An open question the galaxy's instruments cannot answer, and the person inside cannot communicate. Death takes everything at once. Carbonite takes everything one layer at a time. First agency, then personhood, then time, then the certainty of unconsciousness, and leaves only the body behind, sealed in place, technically alive, waiting for something that may never come. That is why it is worse than death, not because it's more violent, but because it is more thorough. Han Solo woke up blind on the floor of a crime lord's palace, unable to stand, unable to trust what people were telling him about how much time had passed. His body had been sold, displayed, he had been present for all of it, and aware of none of it. He recovered. He was one of the lucky ones. He came out the other side. There are people in Legend sources who didn't, frozen and forgotten, blocks lost in transit, damaged in storage, simply never opened because nobody came back. For them, the suspension never ended. Not death, just the permanent absence of everything else held in place. Being frozen in carbonite was not a death sentence. It was what the galaxy reached for when it wanted something worse. Carbonite was what the galaxy reached for when it wanted to turn a person into something else. Darth Vader had a different method. He took a child from a battlefield, gave him a new name, and spent years building a weapon that the Emperor was never supposed to know existed. The boy's name had been Galen Marek. By the time Vader was done with him, he was Starkiller.
Hidden from the Emperor, Darth Vader trained a secret apprentice. His name was Starkiller. Meant to hunt Jedi, he became something far worse. A force Vader couldn't control, and a mistake so dangerous that it destroyed them both. But we'll get to that. So this is the story of Starkiller's rise, betrayal, and fall. The secret discovery. Our story begins in the early days of the Empire. Most Jedi were dead after the Republic and Order had fallen, with Darth Vader now hunting down the last survivors of Order 66. One of those survivors, Jedi Kento Merrick, was hiding on the Wookiee homeworld of Kashyyyk, where Imperial spies reported he was being protected by the Wookiees. So, Vader launched a full assault. He tore through their defenses without hesitation and confronted the Jedi face to face. Vader easily overpowered Kento with raw strength and the Force. However, when he sensed a far stronger presence nearby, he asked where Kento's master was. But when the Jedi told him the truth that his master was already dead, killed by Vader himself, he didn't believe it. Vader could still sense someone stronger nearby, a presence in the Force that didn't match the man in front of him. Before Vader could land the final strike, his lightsaber flew from his hand, ripped away by the Force. It wasn't Kento. It was his son, Galen. Vader was shocked by the boy's raw force power, especially how he used telekinesis without any training, revealing his extreme hidden potential. So, without hesitation, Vader killed Kento and the surrounding stormtroopers and took the boy with him. He still served the Emperor, but deep down, Vader hadn't forgotten his own pain and was already planning revenge. That's why he kept Galen a secret, so one day when the boy was strong enough, they could take down the Emperor together. But Vader never expected that plan to backfire in the worst way possible. Forged in darkness. Vader took Galen and kept him hidden at the edge of the galaxy in his personal ship, the Executor. With a new chapter ahead, he was given a new name, Starkiller. Now, his life only consisted of constant training and torture. So over time, Galen's memories of his childhood and parents faded, pushed aside by the need to survive and please Vader. The training didn't just test his strength, but broke it down, reshaped it, and rebuilt him from the ground up. Each day, Vader pushed him harder, and Proxy, a droid designed to replicate Jedi fighting styles, would strike without warning, forcing Starkiller to fight like his life depended on it. He learned to expect the unexpected and to never let his guard down. Over time, he formed a strange connection with Proxy, because even though the droid was built to kill him, it was the only constant in his life. Ironically, the closest thing he had to a friend. Even with that bond, the training remained brutal, because the real training went far beyond anything Proxy could prepare him for. Vader taught only the basics, leaving Starkiller to survive brutal challenges on his own, like fending off Nogri assassins alone, which forced him to develop his own fighting style. Driven by obsession, he pushed himself even further, once ordering Proxy to chain him in darkness without food or light until he could build a lightsaber using only the Force. While the attempt failed, the pain made Starkiller stronger. He spent long stretches alone, cross-legged in silence, staring into the red glow of his lightsaber as it helped him channel his rage. But it never brought clarity. While other Force users saw glimpses of what was coming, Starkiller, no matter how strong he became, the Force showed him nothing. No visions, no warnings. And that made him furious. It felt like the Force itself was holding him back. Vader saw this as a weakness and began to question whether Starkiller was truly worthy of being his apprentice. But Starkiller continued forward, using his anger as fuel to master every challenge that came his way. Eventually, Vader began sending him on missions. Starkiller became his secret assassin, eliminating traitors and corrupt officers in the shadows. But he was never sent after Jedi, at least not yet. Starkiller was given his own ship, the Rogue Shadow, and went through several pilots over time. While some were killed in action, others were executed for even the smallest mistakes, including one who showed up late for a pickup and was killed by Vader on the spot. But this didn't bother Starkiller, because he viewed the deaths caused by his missions as necessary steps, not just to serve the Empire, but to ultimately earn Vader's respect and one day rule at his side. The trials begin. In 3 BBY, Starkiller finally got what he'd been waiting for. After an intense sparring match aboard the Executor, Vader suddenly ordered him to kneel. Starkiller expected to be executed, But instead, Vader declared his training complete and named him his official apprentice. The first assignment came without warning. Jedi Master Ram Koda was leading an assault against an Imperial base above Nar Shaddaa, putting himself directly in Vader's path. Vader gave a single, ruthless order to eliminate Koda and leave no survivors, not even the Imperial troops stationed at the facility. While Starkiller didn't agree with the decision to kill loyal soldiers, he obeyed without hesitation, believing that true Sith followed orders without question, even when they didn't understand their full purpose. Before departing, he met his new pilot, Captain Juno Eclipse. She had served under Vader and was now assigned to the Rogue Shadow as Starkiller's pilot. Juno's presence unsettled him, as she was different from the soldiers he'd killed without a second thought. But Starkiller knew better than to question Vader's choices. Still, he couldn't ignore the daunting feeling that there was something else at play. During his mission to Nar Shaddaa, Starkiller didn't hesitate as he tore through Koda's militia without slowing down and treating the defending Imperial troops no differently, cutting down anyone in his way. By the time he reached the command center, the entire base was in chaos. While Koda was focused and experienced, Starkiller was faster, more aggressive, and fueled by rage. So the fight didn't last long, as Starkiller overwhelmed Koda with raw force power, disarmed him mid-strike, and dragged his lightsaber across the Jedi's face, blinding him and leaving him barely conscious on the floor, just moments before the structure began to collapse, forcing Starkiller to flee. Vader was pleased, but this was only the first of 3 final missions, each one meant to prepare Starkiller for something much bigger that was still to come. Starkiller was sent to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant to continue his training. Inside the ruined halls of the Jedi Temple, Starkiller faced a simulation of Darth Nihilus and defeated him in direct combat, proving he was strong enough to overcome even ancient Sith fighting styles. But this was only one of several trials Vader had planned to test whether his apprentice was truly ready. The next mission sent Starkiller to Raxus Prime. There, Starkiller was sent to kill Kazdan Paratus, a Jedi hiding among droids in a fake Jedi temple made from scrap. He moved through rough ground full of scrap, got past hidden traps, and destroyed groups of droids before finally reaching Paratus and defeating him inside the fake temple. Still, Vader wasn't finished. Back at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, Starkiller faced Darth Phobos, another vision meant to test his mind using fear and illusions, including images of his father, Juno, and Vader. But he stayed focused, struck her down, and passed the trial without hesitation. Starkiller believed he was ready to overthrow the Emperor until Vader sent him on what seemed like a final test: the assassination of Jedi Master Shaak Ti. The Jedi Master had been hiding on Felucia, where she was training Force-sensitive natives to defend themselves against the Empire. Starkiller landed alone and made his way through the dense jungle, killing every warrior and creature that tried to stop him, until he finally reached the edge of a Sarlacc pit where Shaak Ti was waiting. Their fight was long and difficult. Shaak Ti fought with calm precision, and as she battled, she spoke about the Jedi Code, balance in the Force, reminding Starkiller of the life he'd chosen to forget. But Starkiller ignored her words, gaining the upper hand in the battle. Starkiller forced Shaak Ti into the maw of the Sarlacc, but she returned, controlling the beast and nearly overwhelming him before he blasted her and the tentacles with Force lightning. As she lay dying, Shaak Ti looked up at him one last time. "You're just his weapon," she said. "A slave too blind to see the truth. The Sith always betray their own." And with that, she let go, falling into the Sarlacc's maw, swallowed in a final burst of Force energy. Starkiller ignored her dying words, still loyal, still confident in his path. But those words would return to haunt him with betrayal right around the corner. Betrayal. After returning from Felucia, Starkiller was certain he had finally proven himself. Vader praised his strength and told him the time for their final move against the Emperor had come. But when he stepped into Vader's chambers aboard the Executor, ready for the final phase of their plan, something felt off. Vader didn't talk about an attack on the Emperor. Instead, he revealed they'd been discovered, as Palpatine's spies had tracked Starkiller back to them, and the plan was no longer a secret. When the Emperor entered the room, Vader acted without hesitation. He ignited his lightsaber and stabbed Starkiller through the chest, silencing his apprentice before he could even speak. Palpatine, enraged by the betrayal, instantly demanded proof of Vader's loyalty. Vader obeyed and hurled Starkiller across the chamber with a blast of raw Force power, shattering the viewport and casting him into the vacuum of space. Starkiller was left drifting, seemingly dead, betrayed, just like Shaak Ti had warned him. Vader's new plan. Starkiller's body was recovered from space by Imperial droids and transferred to the Empirical, Darth Vader's secret research vessel hidden in the Outer Rim. There, he was rebuilt with his body being patched together with advanced cybernetics and invasive procedures. The reconstruction was slow, done without anesthesia, and left him in constant pain, both physically and mentally. But even now, he remained under Vader's full control. He didn't know why he'd been spared. Every breath felt like punishment, and yet Vader still had a use for him. Her voice echoed in his mind. "You're just his weapon." Maybe she was right. right. Maybe he hadn't survived because he was special. Maybe he was rebuilt because Vader still had a use for his blade. Again, Vader gave him a new mission, not to hunt Jedi, but to secretly unite the Empire's enemies into a rebellion that would draw the Emperor's attention away and create an opening for Vader to strike. Starkiller had growing doubts, but he continued. His first mission was a personal one, as he set out to rescue Juno Eclipse, his former pilot who'd been imprisoned as a traitor after his supposed death. When he found her, he told her he'd left Vader and was building a rebellion, though that wasn't entirely true. Next, he searched for Jedi Master Ram Koda, who had been blinded during their last battle and was now drinking himself into oblivion on Nar Shaddaa. After hearing Starkiller out, Koda didn't fully trust him, but he saw the bigger picture and agreed to fight alongside him. But to start a rebellion, they needed more than a Jedi. They needed someone with real political power. Someone like Senator Bail Organa. Since words alone weren't enough to earn Organa's support, Starkiller traveled to Kashyyyk, where he freed Wookiee slaves and rescued Princess Leia from Imperial forces, ultimately securing the Senator's full trust. The rebellion began to take shape. As missions increased, allies joined, and support across the galaxy steadily grew. When Starkiller led a major attack on an Imperial Star Destroyer factory on Raxus Prime, he used the Force to pull one of the cruisers out of orbit and crash it into the surface, proving the Empire wasn't untouchable. After the mission, the Apprentice contacted Vader, still believing they were working together to overthrow the Emperor, but Juno overheard the call. Still, she said nothing, choosing to stay loyal to Starkiller as their bond had grown stronger with every mission. Vader gave him one last assignment, to bring Organa, Mon Mothma, and Garm Bel Iblis together on Corellia, where they would sign a treaty and officially launch the Rebel Alliance to begin open resistance against the Empire. But the plan was never meant to succeed, at least not the way Starkiller expected. The fall of the rebellion. The Corellian treaty meeting had gone better than expected. With Organa, Mon Mothma, and Garm Bel Iblis aligned at last, the rebellion finally felt real. They were close to reaching an agreement. Organa would provide funding, Bel Iblis would handle weapons, and Mothma would lead the troops, while Starkiller, serving as the public face and force-wielding spearhead, would lead from the front. But before the treaty could be signed, the room fell into chaos. Vader had arrived. Imperial snowtroopers stormed the mountaintop ruins where the treaty had been signed, while Vader entered the chamber and calmly ordered the senators to be arrested for public execution. Koda charged him head-on, but was caught in a force grip and thrown aside. Vader revealed Starkiller's identity to the senators as his secret Sith apprentice, then suddenly hurled a stone table at him, blasting him through the chamber wall and out into the snow. Wounded and stunned, Starkiller pulled himself to his feet and demanded answers from his master, but Vader coldly admitted he had never planned to overthrow the Emperor, at least not with him. The rebellion had been a setup all along, and Starkiller was just a pawn. As Vader raised his blade to strike, Starkiller clung to the cliff's edge, too weak to fight back. But at that moment, Proxy intervened, disguised as Obi-Wan Kenobi, and launched a surprise attack. Vader destroyed the droid quickly. However, the distraction was enough. Vader thought the story of Starkiller was over, but he didn't realize that it was only the beginning. Starkiller lost his grip and fell into the snow below, surviving the impact, but lying unconscious for hours until Juno arrived on the Rogue Shadow. She pulled him aboard, and as his eyes closed, he finally spoke the name he'd buried for years: Galen Merrick. Galen's last stand. When he regained consciousness, he was finally free of his former master's influence. A new chapter had begun. Galen rejected his codename of Starkiller and for the first time considered himself a Jedi. To save the rebellion, he entered a deep Force meditation, seeking visions that would reveal the location of the captured senators and Darth Vader. Though many possibilities rushed through his mind, one vision stood out: the Death Star. His mission was clear. He had to rescue the captured senators, and with them, the fragile rebellion, no matter the cost. So, before departing, he shared a final moment with Juno as he was unsure of his return. Once inside, he freed Wookiee slaves and sparked a revolt before pushing deeper into the battle station's core. With help from the liberated workers, he pushed through waves of Imperial forces and reached a convergence chamber near the Emperor's observation dome, where he defeated a deadly Shadow Guard and gained access to the throne room. There stood Vader. Without warning, Vader struck with overwhelming force, leaving Galen overwhelmed at first, but he quickly gained the upper hand, countering Vader's moves with speed and precision. Galen broke through Vader's defenses, dealing serious damage and revealing the scarred man beneath the mask, only for Palpatine to arrive and tempt him to finish Vader and take his place as the Emperor's apprentice. Galen hesitated. He was caught between revenge and the Jedi path. Then, Ram Koda seized Palpatine's lightsaber and charged, only to be overwhelmed by a blast of Force lightning. As the Emperor prepared to finish Koda, Galen made his final decision. Galen threw his comlink to the rebels for extraction, stepped into Palpatine's lightning to shield Koda, and, despite the searing pain, drew on the Force to unleash a shockwave that blasted away stormtroopers and left the Emperor stunned. Koda and the senators managed to escape. As Galen collapsed, his final thought was of Juno Eclipse. The clone Galen Marek was dead, but his story wasn't over, because 6 months after Galen's death, Darth Vader began a secret experiment on Kamino. Using Galen's remains at the cloning facilities inside Tamira City, the Sith Lord aimed to create a stronger, more obedient version of his fallen apprentice. But the process proved unstable, with most clones going insane, overwhelmed by memories and visions from Galen's past they couldn't explain. And that's where things took an even more disturbing turn, because after many failed attempts, one clone finally survived after 1,338 trials. He seemed unstable, but memories of a past life, Juno Eclipse, Vader's betrayal, left him unsure whether they were truly his or just echoes from someone else. So, Subject 1138 escaped Kamino with the goal to uncover who he really was. Driven by flashes of Galen's past, Subject 1138 rescued General Kota from gladiator combat on Cato Nemoidia, but refused to join the rebellion, still uncertain if he was Galen, a clone, or something else entirely. Instead, he traveled to Dagobah and encountered Jedi Master Yoda. While on the swamp planet, Galen used the Force to locate Juno, the one constant memory of happiness from his past life. He tracked her to her medical ship, but arrived too late. Imperial forces led by Boba Fett had already captured her and were transporting her back to Kamino. Despite knowing it was a trap, Galen convinced Kota and the Rebel fleet to launch a full-scale assault on Kamino. During the battle, Galen fought through Imperial forces, but when he confronted a corrupted clone stripped of all emotion, he quickly defeated it, finally reaching Darth Vader, the full embodiment of all his suffering. Vader revealed Juno, threatening her life to force Galen into surrender. When she attempted to resist with Galen's own lightsaber, Vader struck her down. As her body hit the floor, something in Galen snapped, and his calm gave way to pure rage as he unleashed his full power, striking Vader down with a storm of Force lightning. Vader knelt, broken, with Galen standing over him, saber drawn. This was the moment, his to end, or to walk away. Now, the player had to decide what kind of man he truly was. In the suggested light side ending, Galen deactivated his saber. He let go of his anger, realizing that revenge wouldn't fix what had been broken. Juno had survived, and senators were safe, and his mission was complete. In an alternate dark side ending, Galen gave in to his rage and raised his lightsaber to execute Vader, only to be ambushed at the last moment. A dark clone struck him down from behind without hesitation, and Juno was killed moments later without mercy. Starkiller was never supposed to exist. He was created in secret, meant to be Vader's personal weapon, but that plan failed, and Galen Marek escaped his fate, broke the cycle, and helped ignite the rebellion.
Starkiller knew he was being made into a weapon. The galaxy had produced worse on a much longer timeline. Thousands of years before the Empire, a different war turned a single soldier into something that no longer remembered being a person, and whose hunger could eventually consume entire worlds.
We don't know much about Nihilus before Malachor V, but we do know he was a human male who served in the Mandalorian Wars, fighting alongside Revan's forces against the Neo-Crusaders. For years, he fought in the war, losing everything in the fighting, his family, his friends, even his will to live. But at Malachor V, as he stood on the planet's surface during the final battle, everything went terribly wrong. The moment had finally come to end the war, and when General Mitra Surik gave the order to activate Revan's secret weapon, he felt something terrible wake up in the Force. A wave of fear washed over him as the mass shadow generator created a huge gravity trap that crushed Malachor V's orbiting fleets in an instant. The ground shook hard beneath him as the planet itself began to crack, and his fellow soldiers died instantly, crushed by the debris or eaten by the dark energies set free. But something different happened to him, something that would change the entire galaxy. Nihilus survived when others died, becoming a wound in the Force, a void of emptiness. Acting without thinking, he drained the life force of a dying soldier nearby to keep himself from falling apart. This act briefly stopped his pain but left him forever wanting more. From that moment, Nihilus's ties to normal feelings were cut. He only felt an endless hunger, not sadness or guilt for the lives he took. He found out that he could survive only by eating the Force energy of other living beings, and with each life he ate, his hunger grew back even stronger. Nihilus's body, already kept alive only by the dark side, began to waste away. Over time, he would lose his physical form completely. Each feeding gave him a short break, but left him even weaker if he went without food, creating a terrible cycle of endless starvation. After the battle, he stayed trapped in the wreckage on Malachor V's destroyed surface, basically stuck among the ruins. Soon, he needed more life force each day just to keep his dying body together, and even while actively draining whatever life was nearby, the emptiness inside kept growing larger. Over time, the dark side's poison ate away at his body until nothing of his original form was left. This faceless ghost would later be named Darth Nihilus by Darth Traya. but at that time, he was simply a being of hunger and dark force energy. After the Jedi Civil War, the fallen Jedi Kreia, now Darth Traya, found this wound in the Force on Malachor V and saw potential in it. She took Nihilus to the Trayus Academy and became his Sith Master, teaching him to focus and use his hunger as a weapon on purpose rather than let it eat him up without control. Under Traya's training, Nihilus's feeding ability became far more controlled and powerful. He learned to feel the life force of faraway Force-sensitive beings and even drain whole populations across space through the Force. This made him a perfect Jedi hunter in the years to come. Under Traya's teaching, Nihilus accepted his role as what she would call the Lord of Hunger. He got better at his ability to feed on the Force, learning to control the process so he could adjust his feeding as needed. Even better, he learned to feel distant Force presences and drain life across the huge distances of space. This ability would make him the perfect hunter of Jedi. Kreia gave him the Sith name Darth Nihilus, a name meaning nothingness to match the emptiness he represented. From then on, he was known as Lord of Hunger, no longer a man, but a living void driven only by the need to feed. In fact, Kreia later said that Nihilus's presence alone could kill. His mere presence kills those around him. Spending too much time near the Lord of Hunger turned his Sith followers into dried-up slaves barely holding on to life, showing how even standing in Nihilus's shadow was dangerous. As Nihilus lost what made him human, he stopped speaking in any normal human language. Instead, when he made sounds, an inhuman hollow voice came out, one that literally carried his hunger with it. Hearing this terrible voice was painful. In fact, Nihilus's very speech could cause pain or death to anyone who heard it. Eventually, Nihilus's real body rotted away completely, and to avoid losing his existence to the void, he tied his life force to his mask, armor, and robes through Sith magic. These items became containers for his spirit. Without them, his essence would disappear into nothing. Therefore, the armor and mask were not just clothes. They were Nihilus. Nihilus soon joined with Traya and another of her students, Darth Sion, the so-called Lord of Pain who could not die, to form a secret Sith triumvirate. Their shared goal was to wipe out the Jedi Order, though each Dark Lord was broken in a different way. Traya, having been thrown out and feeling betrayed by the Force, wanted the complete end of the Force itself. Sion's undead existence was kept going by pain and hatred, and Nihilus was a bottomless pit of hunger that would eat all life if nobody stopped him. By combining their strengths, they planned to finish what Darth Revan and Malak had started, to wipe out the last Jedi in the galaxy. In practice, the Triumvirate's methods worked well together. Sion's Sith assassins hunted and murdered lone Jedi in hiding, while Nihilus worked as a living doomsday weapon. If the Jedi tried to gather or rebuild, he would feel that concentration of life in the Force and eat the entire gathering at once. This meant any world hosting a Jedi meeting became Nihilus's target for destruction. The surviving Jedi learned that even being in the same place was dangerous, forcing them to stay scattered and hidden. Alone, they were far easier targets for Sion's agents. But the alliance didn't last. In 3955 BBY, Nihilus and Sion got tired of Traya's leadership. They attacked their master in the Trayus core. Nihilus slammed her against the platform with the Force, and Sion beat her until she couldn't fight back anymore. Together, the two Sith drained Traya's connection to the Force, cutting off her abilities. Darth Traya was defeated and thrown out, left for dead by her backstabbing students. Thrown out and weakened, Kreia came to sadly realize what Nihilus truly was, a monster born of Malachor that, without guidance, could eat everything without caring. No longer controlled by her influence, Nihilus was not a precise weapon, but a wild force of nature beyond control. In exile, Kreia began to plan a way to destroy the creature she had helped create. She expected that the Jedi exile, Mitra Surik, who had accidentally played a part in Nihilus's creation at Malachor V, would one day return from the Outer Rim. Kreia quietly set up Surik as the answer to Nihilus, believing this wound in the Force could face the Lord of Hunger when the time came. Without Traya's influence, Nihilus existed only to feed. He had no big plan or final goal beyond the next meal. With each feeding, his power grew. But so too did his hunger, doubling after each feeding. He was already dead in every way that mattered. The only question was how many he would kill before he finally fell apart. The consumption of Qatar. In 3952 BBY, Jedi Master Atris came up with a plan, one that sadly became the Jedi Order's biggest disaster. She secretly called the surviving Jedi Masters to a meeting on the Miraluka colony world of Qatar, planning to use their gathering as bait to draw out the hidden Sith threat. Atris herself stayed behind on Telos 4, hiding her absence but quietly spreading word of this Jedi meeting in hopes the Sith would take the bait. She promised the others that if the Sith showed themselves, they could be faced and destroyed. Unfortunately, Atris badly underestimated the power hiding in the shadows. She believed the secret meeting on the Miraluka colony would lure the Sith into a trap she could spring. She promised the remaining Jedi Masters that when the Sith came, they would be ready to strike back. But what she didn't understand was how powerful Nihilus had become. Her trap would work, though not in the way she planned. Drawn by this bright light in the Force, Nihilus felt the Qatar gathering like a burning beacon calling out to his hunger. He immediately set course for Qatar aboard his scary flagship, the Ravager. The Ravager was a wrecked Republic capital ship from Malachor V, a vessel that should have been destroyed. Its hull was cracked and open to space in places. Basically a dead ship kept alive only by Nihilus's power. With this ghost ship and his fleet of Sith leftovers, Nihilus arrived at Qatar to feed. The Dark Lord stood on his bridge and let loose his power upon the planet. He sent out a huge wave of Force energy downwards, an invisible storm that touched every living thing below. When Nihilus was close enough, he spoke a terrible spell, his very voice filled with hunger, and that sound echoed across Qatar, destroying life as it spread. In an instant, Jedi Master Vandar Tokari and the entire group of Jedi at the meeting fell as their life energy was ripped away. Decades of training made no difference. In just seconds, every living thing on the planet was completely eaten. The Miraluka colonists, being naturally Force-sensitive, saw their coming doom through the Force. The entire civilization died in moments, their foresight giving them a brief, terrible awareness of the nothing that swallowed them. Cities full of life seconds earlier had fallen quiet, turned into mass graveyards under a now empty sky. The surface of Qatar was cleaned of all life, turned into lifeless rock and dust. Back on Telos, Atris, who had purposely stayed away from the meeting, felt the shock of those countless deaths through the Force. Only afterward did she fully understand how huge her mistake was. Yes, her trap had drawn out the hidden Sith, but at a terrible price. The gathered Jedi were destroyed, and an entire Miraluka colony was destroyed. Atris had tried to save the Jedi Order by finding its enemies. Instead, her actions almost finished the Jedi Order. Among the destruction, one person survived, a Miraluka woman named Visas Mar. Nihilus found the badly hurt Visas on the surface, and instead of killing her, he knocked her out and brought her aboard his ship. When Visas woke up days later, fully healed on the Ravager, Nihilus silently invaded her mind and showed her a vision of the galaxy through his eyes. In this vision, Visas saw a galaxy where all beings were stripped of the Force, disconnected from one another, and lost in chaos. Nihilus saw himself bringing order to this chaos by eating all life. This terrible sight destroyed her Force vision, literally burning her blind eyes and cutting off her view of anything except Nihilus. In that moment, Visas gave in completely to the being who had killed everyone on her world. Broken by the loss and the dark vision, she became Nihilus's obedient servant, his shadow hand, completely under his control and without hope. Qatar's destruction basically erased the Miraluka presence there, an entire Force-sensitive culture. After this terrible act, Visas Mar became Darth Nihilus's shadow hand, tied to him by a powerful Force bond. Through this bond, created in the vision that broke her, she could feel her master's hunger and pain, and she served him completely, even helping and looking for new feeding grounds when he asked. It was only much later, after the Jedi exile Mitra Surik spared Visas' life and showed her kindness, that Visas woke up to regret. Under Surik's guidance, she turned against Nihilus and began to hate what she had done in his name. But that lay in the future. The Lord of Hunger Ascendant. Having eaten Qatar, Nihilus had gone beyond any normal Sith goal. Politics or revenge didn't interest him. He existed only to satisfy his endless hunger. Even other Sith stayed away from him, knowing that Nihilus would just as easily eat allies as enemies. In the following years, the Lord of Hunger wandered the Outer Rim aboard the Ravager. Followed by a fleet of wrecked warships, he kept going through the dark side. He searched for worlds rich in the Force to eat, and whispers spread of a terrifying Sith Lord who could eat entire planets. The truth of Nihilus's rampage was even more horrible than the rumors. With each feeding, his power and hunger only grew, leaving whole systems lifeless behind him. During this time, Nihilus wandered the Outer Rim with his fleet, searching for worlds strong in Force energy to feed his hunger. Stories of his destruction spread through the galaxy like wildfire, and whispers of a Sith Lord who could eat entire worlds became the stuff of nightmares. But the reality was far worse than any story could describe. Aboard the Ravager, Nihilus's presence had destroyed his own crew. The warship, still cracked and half-ruined from Malachor V, worked only through Nihilus's dark will and a skeleton crew of followers enslaved by his power. Whole sections of the ship were open to space, useless except to corpses and mindless shells. Those sent to serve Nihilus quickly lost their minds and strength, turned into slaves that walked through the ship doing simple tasks, barely alive. The hallways of the Ravager were filled with the proof of Nihilus's hungry nature, each crew member showing the slow death that waited for anyone who stayed near the Dark Lord too long. During this time, Visas Marr acted as Nihilus's agent and messenger. As the one person connected to his mind, she managed tasks aboard the Ravager and helped carry out his will, even looking for important Force echoes or targets for him to feed upon. Tied to Nihilus by the Force, Visas could feel the beating of his hunger within her own mind. She felt that every moment for him was torture, his existence a pain of endless need that only eating life could briefly calm. By now, nothing of the person he once was seemed to remain. Nihilus worked by pure instinct, driven by need rather than thinking. When she looked at her master through the Force, she saw only an all-eating void. Around 3951 BBY, Nihilus's influence spread into the Onderon Civil War. His Sith forces secretly backed General Vaklu's rebels in their attempt to overthrow Queen Talia. Nihilus's agent, Colonel Tobin, Vaklu's second-in-command, acted as the go-between for this partnership. Their goal was to cut Onderon's ties to the Republic, which included getting rid of Queen Talia's Jedi advisor, Master Kavar, one of the last Jedi Masters. Nihilus's followers even set up a camp in the forbidden tomb of Freeden Nad on Dixun. There, the Sith performed dark rituals, trying to strengthen Vaklu's rebellion by drawing on the tomb's dark side power and therefore tip Onderon's fate in Nihilus's favor. In early 3951 BBY, Nihilus felt something wrong in the Force, an echo strangely familiar to his own, yet not the same. Unable to understand it, he sent Visas Marr to investigate and get rid of its source. That source was Mitra Surik, the Jedi exile, who had just returned from exile and unknowingly gave off a wound in the Force like Nihilus. Visas found Surik's ship and attacked, trying to capture or kill her as ordered. But Surik defeated Visas in the following fight. Yet instead of killing the Miraluka, Mitra Surik chose mercy, sparing Visas' life and even treating her injuries. This unexpected kindness shook Visas deeply. Nihilus's slave found herself shown kindness for the first time since Qatar, creating the hope that she could escape the darkness she was tied to. Visas' betrayal had begun, and that spark of freedom would prove important in the trials to come. After Vaklu's defeat, Colonel Tobin, hurt and desperate, ran to Darth Nihilus. Taking Krea's trick, Tobin told Nihilus that a secret academy of Jedi was gathered on Telos IV, unknowingly delivering the bait Krea had planned. This false rumor of many Jedi on Telos instantly caught Nihilus's attention. The bait was set, and Nihilus moved to feed. By this stage, Darth Sion himself stayed away from Nihilus. He knew too well that Nihilus's careless hunger could just as easily eat a Sith ally as any Jedi. In truth, the Sith triumvirate had broken apart in all but name. Sion continued his campaign of terror with elite assassins, picking off Jedi survivors one by one, while Nihilus searched the stars for entire worlds to eat. The two Sith Lords rarely talked now, each following their own path. What remained of the triumvirate was simply two dark beings with different methods of reaching the same dark goal. Without Treya's influence, Nihilus existed only to feed. He had no big plan or final goal beyond the next meal. With each feeding, his power grew, but so too did his hunger, becoming harder to satisfy after every feeding. By 3951 BBY, only a handful of Jedi were even left alive. Masters like Zez-Kael, Vrook Lamar, Kavar, and Atris, who had not gone to Qatar, were among the few survivors, and they stayed in hiding. Basically, the galaxy had no real defense against the Lord of Hunger. No Jedi could gather to challenge him without becoming his next meal. The Trap at Telos. Mitra Surik, the Jedi exile, had returned to known space by 3951 BBY. Without knowing it, she was special in a strange way. Like Nihilus, Mitra was a wound in the Force, formed at Malachor V. Yet her condition was the complete opposite of Nihilus's. Where Nihilus's wound made him always drain life, Mitra's wound showed up as nothing, an empty spot in the Force. She survived Malachor V by cutting her connection to the Force, making herself empty to its touch. This meant that where Nihilus always ate life to survive, Mitra Surik was an empty space that could not be eaten or filled. In simple terms, the exile's very nature made her the perfect weapon against the Lord of Hunger. This Telos trap was the final piece of Krea's long game. By using Colonel Tobin's false report, Krea tricked Nihilus with the promise of a hidden Jedi Academy on Telos 4. However, the truth was different. Telos had no Jedi gathering at all. Only Atris lived there, and she had fallen from the Jedi path and collected Sith artifacts. Still, Nihilus believed the lie completely. Thinking a great feast of Jedi awaited him, he flew towards Telos with the Ravager, expecting a rich meal of Force energy that didn't really exist. Mitra Surik knew Nihilus would attack, so she set up her own trap at Telos. She got both the Republic Navy and the Mandalorians to work together for defense. Admiral Cartho Nassi brought the Republic fleet, and Mandalore the Preserver, leader of the Mandalorians, brought his warriors to help. They all knew that normal fighting alone would not stop Nihilus. After all, how do you fight someone who can eat whole planets? As a result, while their fleets fought Nihilus's escort ships in space, Surik and her allies got ready for the real plan. They would sneak onto Nihilus's own ship. The plan was to get on the Ravager and blow it up from the inside, and fight Nihilus face to face, while the space battle kept his forces busy outside. When Nihilus's Ravager reached Telos, a huge space battle started above the planet. Republic warships shot at Nihilus's Sith vessels, and Mandalorian fighters attacked the Ravager's guns directly. Space was filled with laser fire and explosions, but this battle was really just to distract Nihilus. Using this cover, Mitra Surik led a small team that sneaked onto the Ravager. This strike team had 3 people: Surik herself, Mandalore, who was really Canderous Ordo, and Visas Mar, who had now turned against her old master to help Surik. These 3 people carried the galaxy's only hope of beating Nihilus. They had 2 jobs on the Ravager: plant bombs to blow up the ship and fight Nihilus on the bridge. Walking through the broken hallways, Surik's team fought groups of Nihilus's slave soldiers. The ship itself seemed to cry out from Nihilus's dark power, its hallways dark and frightening. They fought brain-dead Sith soldiers at every corner. These walking corpses were Nihilus's newest victims, still doing his commands but with no minds left of their own. The strike team kept moving toward where the Dark Lord waited. Visas knew the Ravager's hallways well, so she led her friends through the ship's twisted paths. As they moved forward, she could feel Nihilus learning about the intruders on his ship. The dark side pushed down on them like a heavy weight. The whole ship was full of Nihilus's evil power. Then, Visas felt something she didn't expect. Through the force bond connecting her to Nihilus, she felt him getting confused. Nihilus's hunger had found the boarding team, but he could not see Mitra Surik properly. To Nihilus's force powers, the exile was something wrong, an empty space in the force, something he couldn't see or eat. This blind spot in what Nihilus could see would lead to his defeat. The death of emptiness. On the bridge, they found Darth Nihilus waiting for them. Just being near him was terrible. The air got cold and the shadows got darker, like all the darkness came together around him. Even the tough Mandalore felt scared when he saw him. This was not a man anymore, but a living, empty space that had taken a shape. Nihilus welcomed them with a terrible blast of his voice, a sound that hurt their minds with hunger and death. Yet then, something strange happened. Nihilus himself stopped moving. Through the Force, Visas could feel that he was confused. He could not understand what Mitra Surik was. His strongest power, the ability to drain life from his enemies, found nothing to grab when he tried it on the exile. For the first time since Malachor 5, Darth Nihilus didn't know what to do. The person he wanted to eat was impossible to touch, an empty space he couldn't reach. And so, the Lord of Hunger stopped to think. The shock of his failure made the Sith Lord freeze, unable to believe that for once, his hunger couldn't touch what he wanted to eat. Since his main power didn't work, Nihilus had to try other attacks. He threw Force energy at her, sent waves of darkness, tried everything to beat the exile. However, Mitra Surik stayed strong, fighting Nihilus with her lightsaber instead. Unlike all of Nihilus's other victims, Surik couldn't be beaten by his one special power. This fight had to be won with regular fighting. And when they fought with lightsabers, Nihilus's problems became clear. He wasn't used to fighting someone he couldn't drain strength from, so the exile's careful lightsaber attacks began to push him back. Every hit she landed made Nihilus weaker because he couldn't steal life energy to make himself stronger again. The Dark Lord had used his draining power for so long that, without it, he was losing to the skilled and brave Jedi exile. At one key moment, Nihilus threw Mitra Surik backwards with the Force, almost winning the fight. When Visas saw her friend in danger, she bravely jumped between them. She offered her own life to Nihilus in exchange for sparing Mitra Surik. At the same time, Mandalore ran forward, shooting his blaster and hitting the confused Sith Lord. While Nihilus was still stunned from the broken bond and hurt from Mandalore's attack, he couldn't defend himself. The exile got back up quickly, and together, Mitra Surik, Visas, and Mandalore attacked all at once, finally bringing Darth Nihilus down while he was weak. Darth Nihilus could barely stand now, yet he tried one more time to use his power. Unfortunately, there was nothing left for him to use. All his energy was gone, and there was no life around for him to eat. Right then, Mitra Surik moved forward and struck the final blow. Her lightsaber hit perfectly, cutting down the Lord of Hunger. Nihilus fell to the floor, unable to keep his body together anymore. After the battle ended, Visas walked over to where Nihilus had fallen. Maybe feeling sorry for him, or maybe just curious, she carefully took off his famous mask, wanting to see the face of the man he used to be. There was nothing there. Whatever was left of him disappeared completely. His robes dropped to the floor as his body turned to nothing. Darth Nihilus said no final words. There was nothing left to say, and nothing left of him to say it. So Darth Nihilus, the Lord of Hunger, was no more. The endless hunger that had driven him was put out at last, and the void he represented ate the last of his form as he died. Darth Nihilus had eaten entire worlds, yet died hollow and unfulfilled. Proof that unlimited power without purpose leads only to self-destruction.
Nihilus had been hollowed out by war until nothing of the man was left. The clones were hollowed out before they were born. Every clone trooper who fought in the war the Republic spent 3 years losing had been engineered for a single purpose, accelerated through a childhood designed to break the parts of him that weren't useful, and delivered to a battlefield with no say in any of it. Every single day, a clone trooper lived inside a life that had been decided before he was born. Not a life chosen from available options, but one engineered from a genetic template, accelerated through a compressed childhood, and delivered to a battlefield with a single purpose already installed. The galaxy saw identical soldiers in white armor, indistinguishable from one another, following orders without hesitation or complaint. Behind that image, the truth looked nothing like that. What these men actually did each day, from the first maintenance check before sunrise to the quiet rituals they performed after dark, reveals something the Republic never fully acknowledged. Before the briefings or the battles, or the nights spent sleeping with weapons still in hand, the most precisely engineered army in galactic history first had to serve the simple act of being human when nothing about its design encouraged it. Upon examining both legends and canon sources, a day in the life of a clone trooper is far different from what most people would expect. A clone trooper's story did not begin at sunrise. It began in a world of glass and fluid, far from any battlefield, on a storm-battered ocean world at the edge of the galaxy. The earliest stage of a clone's life took place inside fluid-filled glass spheres deep within the towers of Tipoca City on Camino, as shown in Star Wars Attack of the Clones. To produce soldiers on a timeline the galactic government could actually use, Caminoan engineers applied accelerated growth treatments that cut the journey from birth to physical adulthood in half. A normal human needs 20 years to reach maturity. These men reach it in 10, and nothing about that compression was accidental. As the young soldiers grew, their days followed a structure that left almost nothing resembling a normal childhood. Large classrooms filled with children sitting in neat rows, all wearing identical clothes, sharing identical haircuts, focused on the same lessons at the same time. They were noticeably more disciplined than regular children, not because they had been punished into compliance, but because they had been grown that way. Independent thinking, personal curiosity, and individual personality had been reduced from the basic design from the very start. When the school day ended, they did not scatter or play freely. They climbed into narrow, transparent tubes, sealed themselves inside, and rested in the same orderly fashion they had done everything else, lined up in rows, just as they had been during lessons. Their genetic foundation, as explored in Star Wars Labyrinth of Evil, was a bounty hunter named Jango Fett, a man with Mandalorian roots whose physical and tactical qualities the Kaminoan engineers selected as the ideal foundation for a large military force. Standard troopers had most of his independent personality removed from their design because the engineers wanted men who followed orders without hesitation, not warriors who made their own calls when situations became complicated. Advanced Recon Commandos, referred to as ARCs, were a partial exception, retaining stronger personal initiative and better leadership ability. For the overwhelming majority of the army, however, that independent streak was treated as something to engineer away before the soldiers ever left their ranks. The most revealing detail in that early history came from the book Republic Commando: Hard Contact. Despite their adult physical builds and elite combat skills, clone commandos were only 10 years old in real time. They also knew that their accelerated aging meant shorter lives than any regular human would have, and that awareness gave many of them a settled, accepting relationship with the possibility of dying. Many preferred to fall in combat rather than slowly age past the point of usefulness, not out of despair, but simply as the framework inside which they understood their own time. Most of their compressed childhood in those towers was spent in a structure the novel calls the Killing House, a live fire building with corridors that shifted and reconfigured during exercises. Conditions inside were designed to be genuinely dangerous, and some did not survive the process. Those who came out the other side carried reflexes and habits that could not have been taught any other way. They began working with rounds that hurt, but did not kill as young as age 4 or 5, before graduating to real weapons as they grew older. By the time they ever set foot on a real battlefield, the process of taking a life had already been practiced hundreds of times, and the part of the mind that hesitates before doing so had been reduced to something that barely registered. Alongside all of that, from the earliest days of schooling, every trooper was required to memorize 150 contingency orders covering worst-case scenarios. Most described situations the galactic government hoped would never arise. One of them, known only by its number, required the removal of force-sensitive commanding officers who acted against the Republic's interests. Soldiers memorized it alongside the other 149, stored it without question, and went back to their training. It sat there, unchanged, for the entire length of the war. Every soldier who ever picked up a blaster had spent his earliest years being shaped into something the war machine could use. And once the machine had built them, it had to be maintained. For these men, every day began not with purpose, but with a checklist. The book Hard Contact describes the morning routine with exact detail. A soldier started by cleaning boot clamps with pressure tools, rinsing suit liners, and running sensors across the bodysuit to confirm no break existed in the seal that would fail in a vacuum or a toxic environment. Then came the adjustment of the display system inside the helmet, followed by a full breakdown and reassembly of the DC-17 blaster rifle. After that, the survival pack was repacked following strict squad-level rules. Dry rations placed on the 5th layer, positioned between a spare rope line and a hygiene kit. From the first cleaning to the last buckle fastened, the full process took exactly 26 minutes and 20 seconds. That figure was not a guideline, it was a standard every soldier was expected to meet without exception, because a failed seal or a weapon that would not fire was the difference between completing completing the mission and not coming back from it. The armor itself told its own story. As noted in Star Wars Labyrinth of Evil, the hard outer shell was typically marked with mud, dry blood, and charred patches from previous engagements. The short-stock DC-15 blaster rifle showed the same wear, both soldier and weapon carrying the visible record of where they had been. Color patterns on armor plates separated individual units, with magenta and blue vertical stripes on some, yellow line helmets on the others, and gray markings on still more. Since every trooper shared the same face and the same flat, processed voice, these patterns were not decoration, they were necessary for basic recognition. As noted in the canon novel Star Wars Brotherhood, the men also distinguished themselves through scars, body markings, and personal hairstyles. One soldier named Sister wore rows of tightly braided hair falling over her armored shoulders, a detail that says something real about how the men inside those suits held on to who they were. Yet the helmet was more than armor. For men who owned almost nothing, it was the one private space the war allowed them. The book Republic Commando 000 expands on what the helmet meant to the men who wore it. In the warrior language they inherited from their Mandalorian trainers, it was called a bouche, and once sealed, it became a private space. Through the internal communicator, a trooper could listen to music, folk songs, Mon Call opera, or the marching anthem Vote-On, meaning brothers all. During a war that offered almost nothing personal, that small boundary carried real weight. A few minutes of chosen sound before the outside world came back in. Even hygiene was managed with tactical thinking. The series Republic Commando Order 66 notes that troopers shaved using a sharp blade with no foam or scented product, because any smell could reveal a position to enemies using scent-based tracking. Personal care was never purely personal, it was always also part of staying hidden and alive. That same source explains that the Katarn armor system included an internal water supply processed through the suit's own filters, coming out warm. Troopers drank it without complaint, because they had been trained not to spend time objecting to things that could not be changed. And then there was the matter of food, which revealed as much about these men's lives as any briefing document ever could. The standard field ration documented in Hard Contact was a white, tasteless, odorless compressed square of nutrition. No scent reduced the risk of alerting enemies during a quiet approach. No plant fiber meant fewer physical traces that could be followed across open terrain. Nothing about it resembled a meal in any real sense. It simply kept a soldier functioning. Yet, what these men actually wanted when given a choice told a real story. The novel 000 gives the clearest picture of that. Sticky ooge cake was a consistent favorite. Wara nuts, Vuelu nuts, and fresh kavara fruit were prized when available, with some describing real food as a genuinely wonderful experience compared to their standard compressed squares. Off duty near a settlement, they sought out spots like the Kraget for greasy meals of smoked meat or eggs, or Kibu's hut for thick Nerf steaks washed down with large amounts of calf. Base mess halls sometimes provided minced Nerf stew, shaka noodles, fruit pie, and sausages, none of which were remarkable by outside standards, but measured against a tasteless nutrition block, they were genuinely worth appreciating. By the time the last buckle was fastened and the nutrition block was finished, the seal visor was already carrying something the morning routine had never accounted for. Somewhere behind it, a man who had been engineered to feel satisfaction in battle was already listening to music through a communicator no one else could hear. With armor sealed and the morning behind them, the day's focus shifted towards the work itself. The process that preceded every operation revealed how these men thought, communicated, and relied on one another in ways the design had never fully anticipated. As detailed in 000, operational instructions were delivered using three-dimensional display maps of the target area. Soldiers studied entry and exit points, confirmed individual assignments, and reviewed backup plans before moving out. Nothing about the process was slow or informal, because a military built for efficiency from the ground up had no room for either. A four-person squad was taught to think of itself as a hand, with each member being one finger, limited alone, but forming something formidable together. Not every day on the front involved direct combat. Every day required complete readiness for it regardless, and that readiness extended far beyond the weapon in a soldier's hands. The canon novel Brotherhood shows that troopers spent significant time handling the routine outside of military operations, logging supply lists, checking delivery points, and planning distribution routes based on specific hazards in each environment. Some missions were support operations entirely entirely, delivering medical supplies, food rations, and building materials to regions damaged by the fighting. Mission preparation included loading extra materials, typically 3 to 5% above the calculated amount, to cover any loss or damage in transit. Field commanders provided detailed status reports to their commanding officers and to the Chancellor's office, including casualty counts, terrain models, and records of sector activity. A clone trooper was expected to function as a soldier, a supply manager, a technical specialist, and a reporting officer, often within the same working day. Labyrinth of Evil notes that medical specialists handled the wounded in the field, communication specialists maintained the systems that kept units connected, and pilots flew escort and attack runs. Field commanders like Commander Cody wore orange color-coded armor markings and arm stripes, recording which campaigns they had served in. Some troopers worked in bomb disposal units or in repair facilities converted to produce weapons and defensive equipment for the front. In cities including the galactic capital, soldiers were assigned to extended observation work, sitting in concealed vehicles for hours under one of 4 rotating watch assignments: red, blue, green, or white, monitoring specific locations through infrared equipment. That same source establishes that soldiers communicated on 2 channels at the same time. Voice contact ran through communicators built into the helmet, while a detailed system of hand signals allowed squads to coordinate without any transmission that enemy forces could intercept. Silence was a resource in combat, and the men of the clone army knew how to use it. But what happened between operations, in whatever quiet the war allowed, revealed something the mission reports never captured. The book Hard Contact describes one of the more unusual aspects of the clone experience. Ordinary people spent their lives searching for a sense of purpose, uncertain of who they were meant to be. These soldiers had been given that answer before they were old enough to question it. Their purpose was to serve the galactic government and fight under the officers assigned above them. That clarity was designed to make them effective, and it did. Yet clarity of purpose did not prevent them from forming something deeper. Brotherhood describes the men as genuinely human in how they interacted with the Force-sensitive commanders they served beside, capable of real laughter and lasting friendship. They used specific field language, calling battle droids clankers and scrap, and addressing their commanding officers formally as general. Despite sharing the same face and the same flat, processed voice, they learned to tell each other apart through small physical differences and barely noticeable details in how each man moved and carried himself. Many of them carried a private fear no amount of combat training could prepare them for. In their inherited warrior language, the word Darmanda described a state of existence without identity, heritage, or inner life. To protect against that, many troopers treated Mandalorian warrior culture as genuinely their own, learning the language, calling their trainers Buer, meaning father, and following a personal code that placed loyalty to the group above loyalty to larger institutions. This was not a rejection of the government they served, it was a way of having something real to hold on to when the structures above them felt distant and impersonal. A weapon prepared for battle still needed to prove the preparation held. When the order to engage finally came, everything these soldiers had been built to do became visible all at once, and what they demonstrated on the battlefield went far beyond what any training record could fully document. At the battle on the desert world of Geonosis, as shown in Attack of the Clones, the men immediately seized the highest available ground and the most defensible terrain on the field, operating speeder bikes and gunships while adjusting to changing conditions in ways that pre-programmed droid forces could not replicate. Droids could execute instructions, clone troopers could respond to situations those instructions had never anticipated, and that ability to adapt was precisely why they were valued above mechanical soldiers. The novelization Star Wars Revenge of the Sith extends the picture into space and across active ground deployments. Clone pilots flew their fighters with precise coordination, running screening operations for large warships, with units like Squad 7 and Squad 4 operating ARC 170s and V-Wing fighters in organized formations. On the ground, field commanders coordinated heavy weapons teams using shoulder-launched torpedoes and explosive grenades, while troops arrived in active combat zones via gunships and armored transports, descending on rope lines while firing as they came down. The book Hard Contact captures what battle looked and felt like from inside the helmet. The display system in the visor constantly updated with weapon charge levels, armor condition readings, and distance measurements, all processed through small eye movements, with soldiers focusing on what was immediately relevant and setting them aside. Sound was a constant presence, even through the helmet's protection. The rhythm of incoming fire felt through the boots as much as heard through the ears. vibrations moving up from the ground with each nearby impact. What the body registered in combat could not be filtered out the way data on a display could. The novel Star Wars Shatterpoint describes what happens when a unit refuses to stop moving. Clone units moved in wedge formations, pressing forward through incoming fire without stopping, even as soldiers fell on the other side. On foot, units also used curved attack patterns to surround droid forces, closing from multiple angles at once. Their method was swift, organized, and clean. They did not fight for personal recognition. They fought for the regiment and for the brothers beside them, because that was how they had been trained to think, and the battlefield confirmed it consistently. Yet, the most revealing moments were not the ones captured in military reports. That same storyline captures what commitment looked like when there was nothing left to fight with. When a transport was destroyed in space, and soldiers were left floating in a vacuum, some used the lift systems on their backs to drive themselves directly into the path of incoming enemy fighters, using their own bodies to shield the men they'd served with. Even in that moment, they maintained organized fire control, coordinating their rifles against enemy shields until the end. It was simply the task in front of them, and they completed it. Not every trooper who entered a combat zone came back functional, and what happened to those who were hit followed its own organized and often brutal system. The book MedStar 1 Battle Surgeons documents the most common injuries treated at the mobile surgical units the galactic government call RIMSUs. Surgeons regularly worked on chest wounds that pulled air through the body, injuries packed with metal fragments, severe burns from flame weapons, and serious head trauma. In the jungle world of Drongar, the air carried tiny spores capable of triggering spore sickness, causing patients to cough up blood while their body temperature climbed out of control. Electric storms on the surface were violent enough to reduce a trooper to a pair of smoking boots in seconds. The harder outer shell offered less protection than its appearance suggested. Metal fragments cut through it, and flame weapons overwhelmed it entirely. The same source describes weapons built specifically to bypass standard defenses, including a guided tomb called a weed cutter that flew over defensive walls and detonated at chest height, releasing sharp metal fragments in every direction. An experimental device called the Agonizer used targeted sound waves to cause severe pain without leaving any physical wound, sometimes killing the target when the nervous system could not absorb any more input. Treatment at the field hospital followed a numbered rating system. Small colored tags ranked injuries from 1 through 6, with a separate X marking for those considered beyond saving given the number of patients waiting. The surgical approach on the Drongar front was quick and rough, focused on stopping blood loss, covering the wound, and moving to the next patient as long as the trooper could still function when finished. One feature the armor reliably provided, regardless of its other limits, was automatic pain relief. When a trooper was hit, the suit pushed pain-reducing medicine into the body, keeping the soldier alert long enough to be moved to treatment. Labyrinth of Evil notes that because every trooper shared the same genetic makeup, blood transfers and organ replacements between them required no medication to prevent the body from rejecting new tissue. Medical teams working with clone patients treated the shared biology as a practical resource, listing replacement organs in supply logs the same way ammunition and equipment were cataloged. The troopers themselves referred to blood and spare organs simply as spare parts, a term that reflected how completely the system had treated their identical biology as something ordinary and replaceable. Yet the book MedStar 1 documents a detail that complicates every assumption behind that clinical language. A trooper identified as CT-914 expressed genuine and lasting grief over the death of a brother from his training group, a grief that would remain with him until his own death. The conditioning had not removed the ability to carry loss. Some medical personnel early in the war had called these soldiers meat droids, seeing them as identical and therefore not fully deserving of individual consideration. Anyone who worked closely enough with them eventually understood that characterization was wrong. The doctors who began treating them as equipment did not finish that way. On Drongar, a plant called Boda had remarkable healing properties, enough that both the galactic government and the separatists were fighting over control of the fields where it grew. Clone troopers bled and died protecting those fields every single day, yet military policy classified the plant as too valuable to be used on the men who guarded it. Some doctors quietly used it to treat infections that responded to nothing else, but officially, the soldiers who protected the crop had no access to it. They fought for something they were not permitted to benefit from, from, and most of them never raised the issue. The body that survived the afternoon still needed to find rest, but rest for these men was something the design had never fully made room for. Between missions, in whatever quiet the war allowed, these men lived with realities that most soldiers never had to face, and they developed practices that managed those realities that the military had never formally authorized or anticipated. The book Order 66 describes a daily practice some used to maintain their connection to those they had lost. A custom called Ahan in their inherited tradition involves speaking the names of fallen brothers out loud, sometimes at the start of the day and sometimes at the end, combining a sense of peace for those still living with a genuine sorrow for those who were gone. For men without families in any traditional sense, it was the closest thing many had to a meaningful personal practice not tied to a mission. The novel 000 documents off-duty life with real detail. Troopers gambled on small insect races, stories about new equipment passed around with equal enthusiasm, whether accurate or not. Holobooks were read when available, and the Da Werda Verda, an ancient battle chant inherited from their Mandalorian trainers, was performed by hammering on each other's armor plates in a coordinated rhythm that filled whatever space they occupied. For men without families, this shared practice connected them to each other and to something that felt older and more stable than the war they were currently fighting. A night away from the base, called a run ashore in military slang, meant visiting social clubs or lower-level cantinas near wherever they were stationed, drinking ale, telling long jokes, and competing at knife-throwing games. Some troopers described something called feeling it, a shorthand used within the ranks for the built-up battle stress and short-fuse anger that came from years of continuous fighting without any real break. No one talked about it directly as a problem. It was simply acknowledged as part of what they carried, the way they acknowledged the weight of the armor or the taste of the ration block as a fixed condition of the existence they had been given. When a squad took losses and one man came back where 4 had gone in, the training was not adequate preparation for what that felt like. Hard contact adds a detail that shapes how these evenings felt beneath the surface. The engineers made targeted adjustments to the part of the brain responsible for the instincts to freeze or run under threat, reducing natural hesitation and producing soldiers who were genuinely fearless in combat. These men were also built to feel satisfaction in battle, designed with just enough pain response to warn of injury without that pain becoming so overwhelming it stopped them from functioning. They had not simply been trained to fight, they had been built to want to, and they remained fully capable of feeling every part of what that war cost them. Survivor's guilt was real, even when it was not supposed to be part of the design. Most commandos were so trained towards constant awareness that many slept with their weapons still in their hands. The body rested, but the awareness did not fully close. Time on base still included physical training and close combat drills, even when rest was the official status, because staying capable was not something that could simply be paused because the assignments had stopped for a day. The novelization Revenge of the Sith confirms in broader terms what the Republic Commando series shows in specific detail. Across the full length of the Clone Wars, these men had trained together, eaten together, played together, argued with each other, and kept each other moving through years of uninterrupted service. Their helmet speakers reduced their voices to a flat, consistent tone, the same whether they were scared, frustrated, or placing a food order. But the real connections beneath that sound were genuine, and that novel treats them as such without reduction. For these soldiers, brotherhood was not a figure of speech. It was the entire structure of their personal lives, the one thing the design had never fully managed to engineer away. The book Order 66 documents that these men were classified as military assets with no legal rights and no citizenship, considered property in the eyes of the Senate. Much of their tactical knowledge had been placed deep in their minds during their time in the growth tanks, giving them highly developed skills, but leaving gaps in the kind of social knowledge that most people build naturally over years of lived experience. Non-clone personnel who encountered them sometimes referred to these men as Vatborn, a term that carried its own quiet dismissal, and many troopers knew exactly what it implied. They were effective, and they were aware that the system which relied on their effectiveness did not extend that recognition to any other part of how it regarded them. Star Wars Shatterpoint puts the numbers into direct perspective. Starting with 1.2 million soldiers soldiers, the Grand Army kept its men in constant motion, moving from system to system to meet droid attacks across the full width of the galaxy. Even that number was insufficient, with the source noting that the total barely provided one trooper per planet in the government's territory. Labyrinth of Evil adds a harder figure. By the time the fighting reached the Outer Rim, the original 1.2 million had been reduced to roughly half still capable of active service. Around 600,000 men remain from an army that had started twice as large. A phrase that moved through the ranks, "the right man for the job," was repeated because the mission required it, not because the numbers made it comfortable to believe. On worlds like Harun Kal, the fighting mixed jungle survival with unplanned skirmishes and local resistance tactics, what soldiers in the field call the Summertime War. Those who performed well in large organized battles found those conditions to be a completely different kind of challenge, one that standard training had not fully prepared them for. The army adapted because it had no alternative, but the costs were real. At the end of each night, the one order no trooper ever discussed sat exactly where it had always been, memorized alongside the other 149, waiting for the signal that had not yet come. The novelization of Revenge of the Sith describes the carrying out of that final standing instruction without hesitation. When the signal came, it turned every military post and transit point across the galaxy into a position of ambush at the same time. Troopers who had served alongside their force-sensitive commanders for years, who would follow them into firefights, eaten in the same mess halls, and reported to them every day of the war, turned and fired without pause. The directive did not require hatred. It required only that the order be followed, and these men had been built to do exactly that since the day they memorized it. Their mission shifted from fighting the Separatist military to clearing the Jedi Temple of all living occupants, and they approached the second task with the same organized efficiency they had brought to every other operation. Occupying that building produced something unexpected. These men had been trained from their earliest schooling to be completely unaffected by anything unexplained. But in the darkened corridors of the temple after the fighting ended, sounds moved through the structure without a clear cause. Shadows shifted in ways that could not be immediately explained. Some soldiers began to quietly suggest the building might be haunted. Everything about their preparation had been designed to prevent exactly that kind of thinking. Yet, standing in those halls, some found that particular lesson harder to hold on to than usual. When the last room was cleared, troopers moved through the building comparing the dead against unit records and the temple's own files, confirming names, marking entries, making sure every name was accounted for before the count could be closed. Bodies were cross-checked and officially recorded as traitors and collaborators, the language of the new order they were now serving. It was careful, routine paperwork attached to violent action, a combination that had defined much of what these soldiers had done across 3 years of war. Throughout all of it, the helmet speakers kept every voice level, flat, and exactly the same. A single day in the life of a clone trooper reveals the full truth of what it meant to be the Republic's army. That truth had nothing to do with identical faces or interchangeable parts. It was maintenance, discipline, brotherhood, grief, and endurance, all compressed into a repeating cycle designed to keep engineering men useful to a government that had never fully resolved whether they deserve more than instructions. The armor started the day. The briefing focused on the purpose. The battle proved the design functioned. The quiet rituals after dark reveal what the design had failed to remove, and 150 memorized orders waited in the background of every single one of those days, unchanged without question for the entire length of the war. Every element of the routine served a system that needed soldiers who were strong enough to fight, obedient enough to follow any order, and isolated enough by design that they would never have cause to ask why. For 3 years, the galaxy's most precisely engineered army lived this way, not as citizens, not as individuals in the eyes of the Senate, but as men who had built something genuinely human inside a framework that had never intended to give them the space to do so. The clones were a system designed to break people and use what survived. The Sith ran a different version of the same idea, on a much larger timeline, on a planet they decided was worth more broken than alive. By the time anyone got around to asking how that planet ended up the way it was, the answer had been buried under several thousand years of intentional cover-up. Chapter 1. A planet that shouldn't exist. Mustafar sits locked between two massive gas giants, and the gravitational pull from both subjects the planet to a process called tidal forcing. Competing gravitational fields constantly flex and compress the planetary body from the outside in, generating enormous internal friction. You can see a milder version of this on Io, one of Jupiter's moons, the most volcanically active body in our own solar system for exactly this reason. But what Io experiences and what Mustafar experiences are not the same thing. In any tidally stressed world, the energy cycles eventually find equilibrium. Material erupts, cools, resettles, and the internal pressure redistributes. Mustafar has never done this. Every simulation ever run on the planet's behavior reaches the same conclusion. The geological forces at work should have either torn the planet apart or burned themselves out long before the events of the Clone Wars. The volcanic activity is not just intense, it is constant, self-perpetuating, and operating at a sustained maximum that defies every model of natural planetary behavior. The planet should be dead. Instead, it rages. Something is feeding it deliberately. The Jedi avoided Mustafar almost entirely during the height of the Republic. The dark side saturation made it hostile territory, a place where your connection to the Force worked against you, amplifying doubt and fear in ways that could fracture even the most disciplined composure. Most historical accounts simply note that the planet was volcanic and leave it there. That explanation was never the whole story. The volcanic activity was a symptom, not a cause, and no one who accepted it as the answer ever asked why it hadn't burned itself out. The answer lies far in the past, in a time when Mustafar looked nothing like the world that forged Darth Vader. Back when it had water and forests and open skies, and back to the moment one person's grief ended all of that and left behind something that the Sith would spend centuries learning how to use. Chapter 2: The World That Was Lost. Beneath Mustafar's lava-covered surface, the evidence of a completely different world is still there if you know where to look. Deep geological scans have revealed fossilized forests buried under layers of volcanic rock, their root systems still intact, stretching across regions that are now nothing but scorched plains and rivers of molten stone. In other areas, scientists have uncovered dried basins that were once inland seas, complete with the calcified remains of aquatic species that could not survive in extreme heat. The biological record is unambiguous. This planet supported a complex, thriving ecosystem at some point in the relatively recent past. The native Mustafarians have always shown this. Their oldest oral traditions speak of a time called the Bright Star, an era when their world was filled with water, with open skies not yet choked by ash, with vegetations and light and the kind of stability that lets a culture build and remember across generations. For a long time, the wider galaxy dismissed these stories as mythology. The geological record proves they were not. The Bright Star was real, and the person who ended it wasn't a conqueror. She was someone trying to save the person she loved. Her name was Lady Corvax. She was force-sensitive, powerful, and consumed entirely by grief. Her husband had died, and she refused to accept that death as final. That impulse is not unique in the history of the Force. The desire to reach past death, to undo loss, to recover what was taken, it appears again and again in the stories of those who interact with the Force at the deepest levels. What made Corvax different was not the grief itself, it was what she found to act on it. The Aeon engine was an ancient piece of Force-based technology, unlike anything else documented in galactic history. Its precise origins are unclear, but its function was extraordinary. The device could interface directly with the life energy of an entire planetary body, not the Force connection of individual beings, but the accumulated biological and spiritual energy of a whole world, its ecosystems, its creatures, the resonance built up over centuries of organic life existing in relationship with a place. She believed she could use it to reach past death. What she didn't know was what the attempt would cost everyone else. Corvax believed she could draw on that energy and redirect it towards something the Force had taken from her. If the device could tap into the full life resonance of a living planet, perhaps the boundary between life and death could be weakened enough to pull someone back through it. This is the same reasoning that would draw Vader to Mustafar thousands of years later. It is the same logic Palpatine used when he whispered to Anakin about the tragedy of Darth Plagueis. The desire to reverse death through Force-based intervention is not an invention of the dark side. It is something close to a universal impulse, and the dark side has always known how to use it. Horvax was not a Sith. She was someone in agony who found a tool that seemed to offer a way through that agony and used it without fully understanding what she was holding. The horror of what happened to Mustafar is not that it was done by a monster, it is that it was done by someone who loved deeply, reached too far, and left an entire world paying the price for that reach. The attempt failed catastrophically. Instead of drawing energy outward, the Aeon engine destabilized and turned inward. It began consuming the planet rather than channeling it, pulling thermal, biological, and force energy simultaneously into an accelerating feedback loop. The planet's core ignited. Tectonic systems that had been stable for millennia fractured in sequence. Oceans evaporated, forests burned to nothing in hours. The bright star didn't fade, it was extinguished in hours, and the damage didn't stop when the fires did. The atmosphere, once clear enough for open skies, thickened into toxic ash that would not clear for thousands of years. The bright star that the Mustafarians' ancestors had known, the open skies, the water, the living world, was gone in the span of a single catastrophe. Horvax had not saved her husband. She had destroyed an entire world in the attempt, and she had done it alone. Every living thing that died in the transformation fed that wound and made it deeper. Mustafar was not simply destroyed, it became something else entirely. And that something else was exactly what the Sith had been looking for. Chapter 3: The Corvax Catastrophe. The Sith did not stumble onto Mustafar, they were drawn to it. A wound in the Force of the scale created by the Corvax catastrophe does not go unnoticed by beings who spend their lives attuned to dark side energy. The versions that formed at the side of the Aeon engine's failure was not a subtle disturbance, it was a concentrated rupture. A place where the membrane between the physical world and the Force had been torn thin by the violent death of an entire biosphere. For a Jedi, this would register as a place to avoid. For the Sith, it registered as something they had never found before, a natural amplifier, a source of raw dark side power that required no construction, no ritual, no maintenance. Vergences exist throughout the galaxy. The cave beneath the ancient tree on Dagobah is one. The wellspring beneath the Jedi Temple on Coruscant is another. Most of them form gradually, the accumulated resonance of significant events or of Force-sensitive beings spending centuries in a single location. The Mustafar Vergence was different in kind. It did not accumulate gradually, it was created in an instant, in a catastrophic discharge of Force energy that left the site permanently saturated with dark power. That origin gave it qualities that could not be replicated artificially: raw volatility, extreme concentration, and a sustained instability that made dark side techniques feel effortless in a way they did not anywhere else in the galaxy. Rituals conducted there were stronger. Artifacts stored there absorbed and held dark side charge in ways that artifacts elsewhere simply could not. The planet functioned as an amplification system, and the Sith moved quickly to claim it. Artifacts of immense power were transported there and buried beneath the surface, where the Vergence would preserve and strengthen them indefinitely. Experiments were conducted in the volcanic depths, explorations of dark side capability that required the kind of energy concentration only Mustafar could provide. Texts and techniques and histories that the Sith considered too volatile to risk in locations the Jedi might find were encoded and stored there. For generations, the arrangement held. The Sith grew stronger, their artifacts deepened in charge. Their rituals reached levels of power that would have been impossible anywhere else, and the Mustafarians, adapted to their volcanic world and unaware of what lay beneath their feet, continued to survive inside a catastrophe that someone else had decided was too useful to end. It was, by any measure, a perfect arrangement, which is exactly why the Sith spent so much effort making sure it can never change. For the Sith, it was nearly perfect. Nearly because the power they were drawing on was not a stable resource. Every dark side tradition understood, at some level, that vergences were not permanent features of a landscape. They were concentrations of force energy that had accumulated under specific conditions. Change those conditions, and the vergens change with them. Mustafar's vergence was sustained by the Aeon Engine's ongoing disruption of the planet's force resonance, a disruption that the planet's own natural processes would eventually work to correct, the same way any wound, left alone, eventually begins to close. The Sith were sophisticated enough to understand this, and that understanding forced them towards the most consequential decision they would ever make on Mustafar. The vergence was only this powerful because the wound was still open. A heal Mustafar, a world where the Aeon Engine's damage had been reversed, where the ecosystems had recovered, and the force resonance had returned to something balanced, would not have generated this kind of dark side energy. The power came from the ongoing rupture. It came from the sustained, unresolved catastrophe. Sith philosophy has always held that strength justifies its own exercise. On Mustafar, that philosophy reached one of its most extreme conclusions. It is worth pausing on the full weight of that. The Sith were not ignorant of what Mustafar had been. The geological and force-based evidence of a once-living world was not hidden from them. They were among the most thorough researchers of planetary history in the galaxy. They knew the Mustafarians had survived. They knew an entire culture had adapted to conditions that should never have been permanent. They knew, when they found the Aeon Engine, that there was a path back to what the planet had been. And they made a decision, not out of ignorance, not out of necessity, but out of calculation. Chapter 4. Why the Sith chose Mustafar. At some point during their occupation of Mustafar, the Sith made a discovery that should have changed the planet's fate. The Aeon Engine was still there, buried beneath the volcanic surface, damaged but intact. The device that had caused the catastrophe had survived it. Sith scholars and archaeologists eventually located it and assessed its condition, and what they found would have been extraordinarily good news to anyone who did not have a vested interest in keeping Mustafar broken. The damage was not permanent. The Aeon Engine could be repaired. The engineering required was not simple, and the process would have demanded significant time and resources, but it was achievable. More importantly, a repaired engine would not simply stop draining the planet. Because of the way the device interfaced with planetary life force, a functional Aeon Engine running in its intended mode would actively reverse the damage it had caused. The volcanic activity would subside as the tectonic system stabilized. The dark side vergence, sustained entirely by the ongoing rupture, would dissipate as the wound in the force began to close. Given enough time, the ecosystems could return. The planet could breathe again. Mustafar could be restored to what it had been before Korvax activated the engine. The Sith did not repair it, and that single decision condemned an entire world to thousands more years of destruction. A living Mustafar would have been worthless to them. The entire basis of the planet's value as a stronghold was the vergence, and the vergence existed because the wound existed. Restoring the planet would have eliminated the very thing that made it useful. So instead, they did something methodical and deliberate. They made sure the wound could never close. There is a distinction here that matters. The Sith did not cause what happened in Mustafar. Korvax caused it, alone, driven by grief, and by a technology she did not fully understand. The Sith bore no responsibility for the original catastrophe. What they are responsible for is every decision they made after the moment they understood what the Aeon Engine represented and chose to leave it buried. The original destruction was an accident. What followed was a policy. For thousands of years, every Sith presence on Mustafar operated under a system deliberately designed to prevent the planet from ever recovering. Every ritual conducted there, every artifact stored there, every piece of darkside knowledge encoded and hidden in the volcanic depths, all of it ran on power that depended on a wound staying open that the Sith had specifically chosen to keep that way. Sith artifacts known as darkside totems were placed at calculated positions across the planet's surface. These were not decorative markers, they were functional anchors. devices engineered specifically to channel dark-side energy into the planet's wound and reinforce the conditions maintaining it. Each totem held a corruption in place, suppressed the natural processes that would otherwise have begun drawing the rupture closed, and ensured that the volcanic activity and dark-side saturation remained at the intensity the Sith required. The system was not passive. It required ongoing maintenance and intent. The Sith were not simply exploiting a damaged world, they were actively managing its damage, day after day, century after century, to make sure it never healed. The implications, spelled out plainly, were difficult to ignore. They looked at an entire civilization living inside ongoing destruction and decided that destruction was more valuable than the people suffering through it. The Mustafarians kept their oral traditions alive through all of it. They maintained the memory of the bright star and told their children about a green world that existed before the burning, a world they had no reason to expect would ever return. And all of that time, buried beneath the surface of their home, was a device that could have ended their suffering, surrounded by a network of Sith artifacts specifically designed to make sure it never would. That was the dark truth the Sith buried on Mustafar, and Vader would soon arrive to push it further than anyone before him had dared. Chapter 5: Vader's Fortress. Darth Vader chose Mustafar not as a monument to his past, and not as a symbol of his fall. He chose it as a tool, a mechanism he believed could do something no other location in the galaxy was capable of doing. He wanted to use the wound in the Force to reach through death itself. The full story of how the fortress was built is documented in the Darth Vader comic series by Charles Soule. It begins with a spirit named Momin, an ancient Sith Lord whose consciousness had been preserved in a mask that Darth Sidious gave to Vader. Momin had spent centuries trapped in the object, waiting for a host and a purpose. Vader provided both. His expertise was architecture as a Force instrument. He understood, at a level no one else had mapped, how physical structures could be designed to channel, concentrate, and direct Force energy. Vader gave him Mustafar, the most powerful dark-side versions in the known galaxy, and a single directive: build something that could open a door between the living world and the dead one. The construction took years. Early versions of the fortress had failed repeatedly, each collapse caused by the structure's inability to handle the volume of dark-side energy rising from the virgins below. Mustafarian workers died in the backlash. Momin kept iterating, each failure feeding information back into the next attempt. What eventually emerged was not a castle in any conventional sense. Every element of its architecture served the same function. The towers were positioned not for aesthetics, but to catch and redirect the dark-side energy rising from the planet's wound. The angles of the walls, the depth of the foundation shafts, the geometry of the internal chambers, all of it was engineered to draw the virgins upward from beneath the surface, concentrate it through the structure, and focus it into a single point deep in the complex. The whole building was a lens. The virgins was the light it was focusing. Vader had not built a home on Mustafar, he had built a machine designed to break the boundary between life and death. His fall to the dark side had been built entirely around the fear of losing Padme, and everything Palpatine had told him about the dark side's power over death had been aimed at exactly that fear. Vader had lived for years knowing the promise was hollow, that Padme had died, that the dark side had not saved her, that everything he had destroyed had been destroyed for nothing. The fortress was his attempt to prove that the power was real after all, not to undo what had happened, but to reach her, to find whatever remained of her on the other side of death and make some form of contact with it. Two people, separated by thousands of years, both driven to the same world by the same grief. Korvax and Vader, both attempting to use the same wound in the Force to reach past death to someone they had lost. Korvax used the Aeon engine and destroyed a world in the attempt. Vader used a fortress designed by a Sith spirit and failed more quietly, withdrawing from the threshold with whatever he had encountered on the other side, locked away in a silence he never broke. The dark side could pull at the boundary between life and death and make it temporarily thin, but it could not do what either of them needed it to do. The wound in the Force is not a door. It cannot be made into one, no matter how precisely the architecture is designed or how much power is concentrated through it. And what the fortress reveals, across the whole arc of Mustafar's history, is the logical endpoint of everything the Sith had been building toward since they first set foot on this planet. They found a wound and chose to keep it open. They built a system to hold that wound against the natural forces that would have closed it. Their greatest lord then built a machine directly over that wound and tried to reach through it into death. Each step follows from the last, each a more extreme version of the same impulse, the belief that the dark side's power over suffering is the same as power over the Force. The fortress is that philosophy made physical. And like the philosophy, it reached its absolute limit the moment it was pushed furthest. The ritual was activated. The energy of the Virgin surged through the fortress at full intensity. For a moment, and the comics render this with a quiet devastation the films never matched, the barrier between the living force and what lies beyond it began to thin, and Vader stepped through. He reached something. He experienced something on the other side that the comic leaves deliberately ambiguous. Whether it was Padme, a shadow of her, something darker wearing her shape, or simply the confirmation that the boundary could not be crossed. But it did not work. The attempt collapsed. Vader withdrew. The fortress stood intact, its architecture still fully functional, its purpose now permanently unrealized. He never came back to try again. A man who had destroyed everything in pursuit of a single promise had pushed that promise as far back as it could go, in the one place in the galaxy most designed to make it possible, and come back alone. The dark side had not lied to him about the power. It had simply never told him what the power could not do. Chapter 6. The Secret the Sith Hid. The Sith found the Aeon engine and made a choice that most accounts of this planet never fully reckon with. They did not destroy it, did not fear it, did not hide it out of ignorance. They assessed it with full knowledge of what it was, concluded that a repaired engine would cost them everything they had built on this planet, and decided to ensure it can never be used again. But every system built on suppression has a breaking point, and when the Sith finally fell, Mustafar would begin doing something no one alive had ever seen it do, something that proved everything the Sith had built here was never as permanent as they believed. That story is next. Chapter 7. A Planet Beginning to Heal. With the fall of the Sith, the system they had spent centuries building to keep Mustafar broken began to come apart. The dark side totems anchored across the planet's surface were not passive structures. They required the active current of Sith practice and intent flowing through them to hold the wound open. When the Sith fell, when Sidious died at Exegol and the order he had maintained collapsed, that current broke. The totems began to fail, not immediately since these were ancient structures with deep roots in the planet's geology and force resonance, but progressively. One anchor point weakened, then another. Then, the system as a whole began to lose the coherence that had made it effective for so long. No one directed this. No one activated anything. The structures the Sith had built simply stopped receiving what they needed to function, and without them, Mustafar was left alone with its own nature for the first time in millennia. And for the first time in thousands of years, the planet began to answer. And as the artificial system failed, the natural one began to reassert itself. The volcanic cycles that had been sustained at maximum intensity by the anchored wound started to moderate. Lava flows that had been continuous for as long as anyone alive could remember began to slow and cool in sections, leaving solid ground where there had been none. The atmosphere, choked for millennia with volcanic particulate and dark side resonance, began to thin in certain regions. Not dramatically, not uniformly across the whole planet, but measurably. And then, in areas where the lava had cooled long enough for stable ground to form, and where the atmosphere had shifted enough to allow for something other than ash, plant life began to appear. Mosses first, then ground cover, small and isolated at first, the kind of pioneer organisms that colonize newly stable ground before anything more complex can follow. But present, alive, on a world that had not supported visible plant life in thousands of years. This was not just recovery, this was proof that everything the Sith had built on Mustafar had been a lie. If Mustafar's condition had been the result of natural forces, the tidal compression from the gas giants, the instability of its orbital position, then the fall of the Sith would have changed nothing. The planet would have kept burning regardless of what happened to its most recent occupants, because natural forces do not respond to political events. The gravitational relationship between Mustafar and the gas giants on either side of it was not affected by Sidious dying at Exegol, but Mustafar began to heal the moment the Sith-built system maintaining its destruction failed. That is not a coincidence, that is causation. The wound was artificial, the maintenance was real, and without the maintenance, the planet began to do what it would have done centuries earlier if the Sith had not intervened. It started recovering. The Mustafarians noticed. Their oral traditions, which had carried the memory of the bright star across thousands of years of volcanic darkness, began to take on a different quality, not just memory of what had been lost, but something closer to anticipation. The elders who maintained the stories of the Green World for generations they had no reason to believe would see any change began to speak differently about what might still be possible. For the first time in thousands of years, the bright star was not just a memory, it was beginning to look like a direction. Whether that recovery will ever reach the scale of what Mustafar was before the Korvax catastrophe is a question that remains genuinely open. The Aeon engine is still buried somewhere beneath the surface. Whether anyone will ever locate it, repair it, and use it as Korvax intended, to restore rather than drain, is not answered by current canon. But the direction has changed, and the reason it changed tells you everything you need to know about what the Sith actually were on this planet. They found a world that someone else had broken by accident. They found a device that could have fixed it, chose to leave it buried, and spent centuries actively suppressing any chance of recovery because a broken Mustafar made them stronger than a living one ever could. They built totems to hold the wound open. They raised a fortress over it and tried to reach through it into death. They kept an entire people living inside destruction that existed only because their suffering was useful. The Mustafarians told their children about the bright star for thousands of years, never knowing that the reason it could not return was because someone had made sure it wouldn't. The Sith were wrong about a great many things, but the most consequential thing they were wrong about was this: that wounds held open by Force stay open forever. They don't. The moment the Force holding Mustafar broken was removed, the planet began to prove it. The Force does not remain broken forever, not because of some abstract guarantee, but because the structures that hold wounds open are mortal. They depend on the beings who built them remaining in power, remaining committed to a philosophy of extraction that eventually consumes the people practicing it as thoroughly as it consumes everything around them. The Sith built their power on a wound in the Force. When they were gone, the wound began to close, and Mustafar, slowly, imperfectly, and against all the odds of its own history, began to remember what it had been. The bright star that the Mustafarians had kept alive in history for thousands of years was not just a memory of the past, it was, finally, a description of what was coming. If this story pulled you in, the next chapters go even deeper. We've already explored the full rise and fall of the Sith, from their earliest beginnings to their final collapse, in our complete timeline documentary. That's the perfect place to continue. And if you want to dive even further into their origins, power struggles, and the moment that shaped the dark side itself, check out our Dawn of the Sith timeline. Both videos expand the story beyond Mustafar and reveal how the Sith rose and why they always fell.